Like just believing you could do it and having some basic common sense principles, like their number one predictor of being okay with your money. And then a larger study was done, um, and reinforced. It said it was not only was that the top, but also outperformed inheritance and income. Like
Wow.
so like you could actually do better just believing you could get ahead and making some common sense steps forward than you could inheriting
And
granddad's
this is the
money.
consumer protection people, like the most conservative people. Like we're not talking of some guru on the internet or
Yeah,
something.
no. These are not like wildly leftist, or right leaning, get ahead gurus, or you can't ever get ahead. So I think it's like believing that you can is shockingly important. And so people say, well, oh, yeah, that's great for back then, but you can't do it now. A perfectly mobile society, people born at the bottom 20% would have an 8 in 10 chance to get out at all, to whatever the other categories are. Okay, the United States today and most of Europe is around 6 in 10. So you got a 6 in 10 chance of being born at the bottom and making it out of the bottom, 4 in 10 chance of making it to the middle class or higher, 1 in 10 chance of getting all the way to the top.
If
Now,
I
you can
remember correctly, it's about 64%, right? That was the exact number I
something
think you had
around
for the
that number.
US and Denmark. And it's the
Yeah.
same in the US
So
and in
yeah, I know
Denmark.
that's downward mobility. So your chances
Okay,
of
that's the drop.
So if
Okay.
you're born at the top, you're the guy born at the top or the woman born at the top, you have a 6 in 60 something percent chance of falling out in your lifetime. And it doesn't matter if you're in Denmark, which is pretty socialist to the left. I mean,
Right.
progressive, or the capitalist US. It's kind of the same. Now, is that perfect? No, it's not. 8 in 10 would be perfect. And then my question becomes, has anybody done that? And the answer is no. Like there is not a society on the face of the planet in human history that has had perfect upward and downward mobility. It's never happened. So do we have perfect mobility? We do not. And we can always work at getting better. But we have a lot more than we think we do. And what are the steps that it takes to get there? All right, so just to go over them, pretty much everyone who went from behind to ahead in American history did one of, or usually a combination of 7 things.
So today, for the first time, I'm going to be speaking with a crypto billionaire. It's not what you're thinking about, and you'll have to listen to this conversation to understand the details. He was one of the last people off the real estate Titanic in 2008. He sold his home. A week later, one of his neighbors couldn't sell for several years. He describes his childhood as hillbilly elegy, but without the drugs and the booze. And he's written one of the most amazing books, probably of the decade. I'm so happy to welcome Joseph Moore to the System Gambit.
So excited to be here.
So, Joseph, I listened to your book on audiobook. Would you like to hold up your book just so people see it?
So here's the screen grab, as it were. How to Get Rich in American History, 300 Years of Financial Advice That Worked and Didn't. And maybe there's the critical part. Not everything works. Not everything people tell you to do, you should do.
Definitely. And even though you've called it American history, I think there are just so many lessons that are global. And it won't carry over one to one, but I think there's just a lot of principles and mechanisms that are pretty universal.
I've been really blown away by how global the response has been. I mean, and I kind of expected American audiences to respond, right? I mean, we hit the national bestseller list, all those things, right? All the things you hope for as an author. But what surprised me, we're getting like German press, especially like talking about it, the UK, like just places that I didn't think would want to have that kind of a conversation, or really hungry to have that kind of a conversation. And so, yeah, I've been really, really grateful for the global response.
Yeah, I think it's because you hit, I guess, one of the most deep of human nerves. And it's this idea of trying to get ahead. I think your book is really for the person who wants to get ahead. And I think there are enough people everywhere around the world that just want to get ahead. And of course, you take the American context and you dive deep and present the American context. But like I said, I think the principles and mechanisms are pretty similar. And what people need to do is take what you have in your book, marinate in it, and then sort of rebuild it for their context. First principles.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. And the context is very context dependent, right? And yet,
exactly.
They're you think about different educational systems, different, career path systems, like for instance, in Germany, it's very difficult to get off of one career path and onto another, right? Entrepreneurship is not as kind of easy mid-career as it is in the United States. Yeah. A mid-career transition of careers in some Western European cultures, it sounds almost like, like a mental health breakdown. Like, what happened to poor so and so? He decided to go off and start a business. Poor him. But like then, which in the United States context is welcomed, and we're kind of used to people saying, "Hey, I'm 39 and I have this business idea and I'm going to quit and try." It doesn't always work, by the way, right? Risks don't always pay out. That's why we call them risks. But I think everyone is eager to understand, like, does history have anything to teach me about how to pursue some level of uplift in my life? And sometimes that's not small business. Sometimes it's within your career. Sometimes it's geographic mobility. But I do think everywhere you go, that part of human nature is universal.
100%. And it's so deeply human. I think it's really deeply human. That's so unique to our species in a nice way, I think. But let's start with painting an image, right? Because I think this really captures in many ways the spirit of your book. So it's 1835, right? And thereabouts. We're in Michigan. There's an escaped slave with no money, no scissors, no barber skills. And he starts printing his own currency and he starts trading it in the town and opens a salon.
Mhm.
Do you want to explain what's going on here? How does this capture that human drive to get ahead?
The human drive to get ahead, and just how so many of the things that we think are new are actually really old. So the man you're talking about is named William Wells Brown. Brown is enslaved in Kentucky. He escapes. He gets as far as Monroe, Michigan, which is the middle. It's a really rough. This is not a big place, right? And he gets stuck. He has no money. He has no friends. He knows no one, and he's technically a refugee. Like he's running from the law. It is illegal to be what he is being. A landlord takes pity on him, offers him a space to start a barber shop to get on his feet, which is a fabulous idea. You've already pointed out, with only 3 problems. Number 1, he's never cut hair. Number 2, he does not own scissors. But the third problem is the one that really vexes him, which is that there's no one who knows how to pay him because there's not enough money in early America. It was a shortage of cash. He borrows scissors, solves problem number 1. He doesn't tell anyone he's never cut hair. In fact, he actually painted a sign that said, like, fashionable barber from New York, which, by the way, he's never been to New York. He is a runaway slave from Kentucky, but he's like, they won't know. So he says, and he tells everyone, like, the only other barber in town has never been to New York to see the latest hair fashions. I mean, this guy is absolutely winging it to try to stay alive. And he goes to a printing press and he says, will you print me money? Basically, money that will be redeemed for a haircut at my shop. Now, it's a little more complex, but like, let's just boil it down to its essence. And the guy prints him the money. And so he goes around town and says, can I use this to pay rent and lodging? It's good for a haircut. Can I use this for food? You could eventually, there's way more floating in town than there are haircuts. But other people start trading them with each other because they know, like, this is redeemable in some way. And he gets on his feet, and for a year, this money is circulating around Monroe, Michigan as valid tender. This is something I don't talk about in the book. There's even a run on his personal bank. The other barber gets jealous, starts hoarding William Roses Brown's money because he knows he can't redeem it all at the same time. And at the last minute, Brown is alerted to this. He sees the guy coming with all of this money to get redeemed. He closes up, runs out the back door, and goes to a friend. He's like, well, what do I do? Because now they're going to put me in jail for not redeeming my currency. And the guy's like, well, you're going to do what absolutely every other banker in America does. You're going to, like, go around and start exchanging what you do have for more good money. And he just basically becomes a banker and a hairdresser. All right, now, the interesting part about this, and the thing that's kind of instructive, it was 2 things that are instructive. 1, that's a lot of gumption. Like, if you think you're up against it and can't get ahead, I mean, this guy is up against it. But the other thing that happens is that Brown eventually survives all this, trades for enough good, better currency over time, and he does eventually get out of town and make it to New York. He actually does go to the place he says he's from, and freedom. And he becomes an international celebrity, by the way. He becomes a famous kind of in the mold of Frederick Douglass. He's kind of one of these orators. He's a great speaker. He's a great storyteller, and he's an abolitionist. But when he leaves and actually gets to freedom, all of his money goes to zero. Like, the value disappears with him. And that was normal in American history. And that means that we were talking earlier about context dependent. Like, a lot of financial advice, all financial advice, is context dependent. And the context in the 1830s was that money was very akin to cryptocurrency today.
Mhm.
Meaning, if you go to work and you get paid in Dogecoin, and I go to work and I get paid in Fartcoin, which is a real thing. I mean, I still have to convince myself it's a real tradable asset on the cryptocurrency markets. What are you and I going to do? Because you've got a family, I've got a family, we got to feed the family. The first thing I'm doing is getting that crypto out of my wallet. I'm getting it turned into food. I'm getting it turned into something more valuable to me that won't disappear in value. Because yes, it could go up, but we also know it can go down, and that you do not want to be holding it when it goes down. That is the same advice, the same idea that early Americans had for half of the country's history. And so the advice that grandparents would give to grandchildren was, get on my knee, young lad, and I'm going to teach you what to do with money. And the answer is get rid of it as fast as you can. Never, ever save money. Now, if my father.
Is that at the source of American consumerism? I mean, reading your book, it just kept coming back to me saying, this is the explanation. Because, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there,
No, it's great.
but I really think the fact that generation after generation, you've been told by your elders, by those who've made it, who've survived, go spend the damn thing. I think that's what keeps the American economy going, right? Like through good and bad.
That's an interesting, I wonder if that's a thread of it. I think there's multiple threads in that, one of which is obviously like the marketing and the kind of a rise of consumer credit in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
But Americans were always, I mean, this is what Ben Franklin's whole like moralistic storytelling is like this. He writes the story of this old man in the 60s at what's called a Vendu sale. Vendu is just a word for like a junk store. It's like a Vendu is basically where all the unsold inventory is going to get offloaded. We have a store in America called Big Lots, and it's just that. It's like stores that couldn't sell stuff, send it to Big Lots, and you never know what you're going to find, but like it's super cheap. And this is what a Vendu sale is. And he has this old guy going, trying to moralistically preach to these young people. You're about to go in debt to buy crap you don't need that you're going to wish you hadn't bought. And everyone's like, God, this guy's so wise. And as soon as they open the doors of the sale, everybody rushes in and does it anyway. And I think so Americans have always been that way. We've always had a culture of spend fast, get it now. And that may be part of why. I don't know for sure it's not the only one, but it's certainly part of the thread. But that's what people were told to do. That's another reason Americans are big into real estate investing, right? Like the idea was get that money out of your hand and put it into real estate or something they can't take the value down from you, right?
And real estate can't run away from you, right? So that's the good.
Yeah. Now you can, the payment can run away from you, but the land's sitting there.
It's there.
And so
yeah.
I think now if my dad walked in and sat my kids down and said, now kids, grandpa wants you to know whatever you do with money, don't save it, spend it as fast. I think, Dad, step away from the bottle. Like Dad, go in another room. You can't corrupt my children, because context dependent. An advice that worked in an earlier era, it would not work in my era, right? And so I think one of the things we get from history, and one of the things I really hope that books like mine and yours can do, is help people understand, no, actually, history has real translatable value to conceptualizing what was another culture doing? What was their context? How can I use that to understand my context? So yeah, I love that story. And also because William Morris Brown's just a cool dude running around, like figuring out on his own how to get to freedom.
No, definitely. I just want to riff on this, especially since you're a historian, right? Because so my grandmother was from the Punjab, the region in Northwest and South Asia. And it was a pretty volatile region, because of all bunch of invasions and land wars and all of that. Culturally, the stereotype of the Punjabis is that they just party and spend. The moment there's money, it's spent on you just have a great time, right? So you start feasting and drinking or whatever, and you just have a good time. The explanation there was, you would do that because you don't know if tomorrow you're in a war again, right? So you'd rather have a good time. Interestingly, geographically, US is, protected by two large oceans on both sides. I don't think, the American experience has that external invasion, attack, war kind of thing. I'm guessing internally it's very unstable, right? I'm guessing there's a whole bunch of, I love, my favorite genre is Westerns, and I keep watching anything that comes out. And I guess it was quite violent and wild. But where does this idea of spend it all come from? Is it just because currencies or, the medium through which people exchange value was unstable? Or was there also a more, let's say, violent military, you don't know if you'll be alive aspect to it?
So let's kind of contextualize that. So the first part, the currency, there just wasn't enough currency for pretty much all of colonial, revolutionary, early republic. Basically, till you get to the Civil War, there's just not enough money. And so if you even go out to the 1600s or the 1500s, like the earliest colonists, like you're so far removed from the centers of power. This is, I could really nerd out on this stuff. There's my historical grandfather, meaning like the dissertation dissertation advisor of my dissertation advisor was Jack Green. And Jack's idea was centers and peripheries, like this idea that the center has where the money is, where the power is, where the networks can really affect what you do. If you're in London, right? If you're in certain centers, but on the periphery, when you're an ocean away, that network power is just weaker, you just have to make other choices to make your world survivable. And with money, the money that could get to you all the way out there, oftentimes there wasn't very good money, and it wasn't enough of it. And so colonies got really good at printing their own currency because they had no other choice, right? This idea that they're going to turn into a barter society. And so, yes, early American money from the very earliest days was a peripheral society. And so they had to have peripheral money. I do think, though, it's interesting, as soon as Americans can get consumer goods, they get really into them. Now, how much of that is their money supply? How much of that is human nature? How much of it is because you are on the periphery? You really want to have some hint that you also could live like you're at the center. And one of my favorite examples of this is in Timothy Breen's book on consumerism in early America. But there's this guy, these several guys, and they decide to take a jaunt into the wilderness, in essence, right? They get on a boat in New York, they float up, they're just seeing the wild America, basically like a guy's hunting trip. It would be the equivalent today, right?
What year is this roughly? Like, when's this
I
happening?
have to go back. I want to say it's like the 1740s or 50s.
Wow,
It's
okay,
it's
that's
well
quite a
before
while ago.
well before the revolution, right? And they see a cabin on the side and they pull over, and it's, they kind of pull their boat over. There's these children playing, and it is the quintessential illiterate American frontier cabin where they're uncouth, they're all barefoot, mom, dad, and kids, tiny little cabin where they all live. And the wife is so excited that they have guests. And so she tries to properly bring them in. And they're just they're like, oh, these poor frontier, trash, right? And they go in, and there is an English tea set, a very expensive English tea set that it's like a very middle class, or a really upper middle class symbol.
Definitely.
And it's probably used, and it's probably chipped somewhere, but they managed to afford this expensive tea set. And these rich guys start to berate this poor woman, who, by the way, is sacrificing the little she has to pour them tea and try to do etiquette the right way. And they're like, how dare you spend the little money you have on these? You have no business being this person. But Americans always wanted to have these little class status symbols that would show I could belong to if I was over in London, right? If we didn't live all the way out here, we would belong to. And so some of it may be kind of class symbol status, just kind of an attempt to show the world you can have those things too. And at the end of the day, the entire American project, whether you're coming from, China into San Francisco, whether you're coming from Italy, Poland, Scandinavia, Scotland, was a project of people trying to pursue a life that was better than they could live where they were. And so some of it's status symbols, some of it's money, but it's all interesting history.
And some of it is universal, right? And Ajmi just riff on this because they did studies on this. So JPAL at MIT with, Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo got the Nobel Prize. So they wrote a book called Poor Economics. And I think one of their studies was precisely this, where they gave, instead of deciding what to give people under the poverty line, they just gave them cash and observed what they went and bought. And they would end up buying a bunch, of fancy stuff instead of buying more nutritious food. So their whole logic was rationally, you should go and buy more nutritious food and make sure you are first nutritionally in the right place and that you have enough to eat. But people would buy a little more food, would buy perhaps more sugary or, more refined flour kind of food, like tastier food, but not necessarily more nutritional food. And then they would go and spend it on leisure. And I think, or the teapot set. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, but it seems to be universal. The moment you give people money, wherever they might be, they want something aspirational. They want to get ahead, as you put in the book.
Yeah. No, it's that is part of the human condition. And so I think that's one of the things that, you get from history, is this ability to kind of translate what these things were like, and to remember, by the way, that everything you're encountering has been encountered before. And so, they may or may not have had the right solutions, and their solutions may not be your solutions, but at least the problem was solved in some other era by somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what is very important now, early on, to set the stage is because you're a historian, and how should one in a healthy and useful way leverage history to live better? I think one can go down really dark rabbit holes if one interprets history the wrong way. What I really loved about a quote from your book is a historical sense is an understanding of how things do not happen. So you're not saying, oh, it happened like this in history, so it'll happen again. You're much more saying, let's look at the counterfactuals of today and say, okay, there's a logic for why all this in the envelope of everything that can happen in the future. There's a bunch of stuff that just cannot happen. And that is what history is useful for. And then you have an uncertainty envelope in which you have to decide and take risks and figure out for yourself right now. So most people study history to learn what happened, right? But you study history to inoculate against nonsense. And I love that. Do you want to expand on that? Like, how do you how did you arrive at this sort of this realization, insight? How do you teach it? How do you share it with others? And how do you hone it over time?
Oh, what a great question. So, and we could, I probably could swap notes on this, right? With the way that you take kind of global, and especially global military history. And I remember reading your book and being like, I would have never thought of Toussaint Louverture as like a model for systems, modeling systems and how they need to change. So there are fault lines in what's called historiography. So if you think of what Morgan Housel did with his book, right, was like how can we translate psychology into something useful and get past some of the academic debates? But to get there, you kind of have to understand the academic debates. And I kind of want to do the same thing for historiography. This is the study of it's historians studying history itself as an idea. And to simplify a lot of words printed in a lot of journals that very few people read, it kind of splits along the fault line of, do you think history is applicable or is it inapplicable? Like, in other words, which I don't think is actually a word, inapplicable, but like, is it
useful or is it not? Is that the way
right?
you
Is it useful or is it not? Can you actually learn? And there is a sizable group of historians who say there's absolutely nothing you can do with this information, and yet that's their job. And I was always like fascinated. Well, like, why are we doing it?
It's like in math, right? Or also like when you applied it to machine learning, right? In the context of algorithms that learn on data and AI, etc. It's like how much of your data set is actually relevant to what you're trying, to the future, and how much of it are you just overfitting a model on the data that's there.
Exactly. And that's the fear that they
Yeah.
have, is that you would overfit, right? Like you would
Right.
take some story. This is how the American Revolution happened. Let me get an example of an argument in their favor. Okay. So an argument in their favor is that the United States has its constitution. With one 5-year exception in the 1860s, it holds pretty well. And it becomes this kind of global model in the 20th century of like right governance. And so what happens all across the world? All of these countries that get independence try to basically copy paste the US Constitution into their context, and it doesn't work because it's context dependent. And so so historians like Gordon Wood, the late Gordon Wood who just passed away, we're in this camp of like, you can't just overfit the past to the present. Right. And one of the classic examples of doing this wrong is Chamberlain in World War II, or the lead up to World War II, in that the appeasement idea, if you go back to the 1930s, what is the clear lesson of history? The clear lesson of history is you don't go to war in a modern world, because modern technology is far too destructive. Nobody can win. It's an unwinnable proposition to go to war. So if Hitler is going to be a little aggressive, we kind of figure out how to manage that, because it's far less bad than the alternative. And Chamberlain and every person that he knows this to be true, because they were the generation of the trenches.
And
Well, as it turns out, you're overfitting the historical lesson to a different context, right? And I know that's a pretty simplistic example, but it's a good example of why that group of historians says you can't do anything with it. Now, there's another side that says it's highly applicable, but even in there, most of those historians are basically political actors. They see themselves as being able to take political lessons from the past and apply it to political lessons to today. The vast majority of them are on the political left. I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but that's just, I used to joke with my academic colleagues, like, you guys want to be the mortar fire for the culture wars, right? Like, you want to go study history. You don't want to be in the front lines. That's too dangerous. But you want to sit back here with tenure and like lob historical shells out to be useful to your side. And that's what most of the utility value of history became. Okay. Where I come from a very working class southern United States, kind of rural agricultural areas, industrial technology areas. I'm sorry, industrial, like, we had a lot of mills, is what I'm trying to say, mill towns, right? So you were either a farmer or you were a mill worker. And the way history was understood by people around me was not as inapplicable on one side and not as as fodder for politics on the other, but as like a useful guide for understanding that all the perplexity of life had already been encountered and that all you were trying to do is make sense of it, and that you could kind of if you could make sense of their world, it would help you make sense of yours. And I do think that's where the application value of studying history lies. So it would have been farcical to the people I was raised around to think that you couldn't use history to learn lessons in the same way that they would have been farcical to think that you could just do what they did and it would work today. There is another path, and that's kind of a history that you can learn from, and mostly to see all the things that how people failed before you is a really instructive lesson that you have the failure option in front of you too. Be careful.
I think very much, and like to draw parallels also with my field, like it says, I was trained in math and machine learning, and there's a lot of times in my career I was asked to build a forecast for revenue or whatever for in a company, and very often it was either sales or product or operations or someone who had a certain target forecast in their mind of what kind of numbers they could hit, and they essentially wanted me to come up with the model output that suited their goal. And I said, that's not my point. My point is to leverage the patterns in the data, and the algorithm is going to tell you, I fine tune it, I make sure we don't overfit, etc. That's my job. The number that comes out is what you have to live with. I'm not interested in massaging it to suit your, your sort of company politics, your corporate politics goals. And as you say, I think a lot of history gets manipulated into that. And the people who do that then turn blind, right? A bit like the Chamberlain argument you said, because I think a lot of economists sitting in Oxbridge were running the numbers, and they said there is no way we're going to war in Europe because we're all trading so much more amongst ourselves compared to before the First World War. And that's such an absurd argument, because when you go to war, you don't go to war thinking, oh, if I punch, if I knock out someone's eye, they'll knock out my eye. That's the whole point of war. You go in thinking, if I can knock out both their eyes, they knock out one of my eyes, I'm okay with that. That's the attitude, right? And it was interesting, just a few years ago, I was at the OECD at a conference, and then one of the smartest economists I admire a lot was making a similar argument for war in northeastern Asia. So China attacking, Taiwan, or attacking Japan or something like that. And the same argument, oh, they're so interconnected, they've invested into each other. And I'm like, that's not the point. If you go to war, you don't give a shit about all of that. You just want to kill the other person, and you want to make sure you survive. That's all that matters.
Yeah. No, I think that's one of this idea of overfitting one context to another is a continuous problem. So that's when you're writing books that try to use history to gain insight, you have to be really careful, right?
Exactly.
You do not want to simply say, here is what they did, therefore this is what you do. It's more of, this is what they didn't do, and this is why they didn't do it. And if you could start there with an intuitive understanding of the past is a different terrain, and you've got to adapt what you're learning to the terrain they're operating in, and now you have to learn how to operate in your own terrain in a business context, or in a personal finance context, or in a any kind of finance context. You have to understand the terrain really, really well to understand why certain decisions don't get made.
Definitely. And I think this is something I really struggled with, like transitioning from graduate school in math to trying to use historical examples as a mental model, or even as a thought experiment. So my goal was really, I'm not proving anything like in math. I'm not saying this happened, so it'll happen now. It's much more, here's a thought experiment. What if you were in this person's place back in the day? How would you look at it, right? What are things you would keep in mind? And what if I made you look at it through that lens, right? What sense? So it's much more just a thought experiment, a counterfactual, a way to just, like Einstein, when he comes up with the theory of relativity, what if I'm sitting on a photon, right? How would that, like, what happens? And I think it just allows you to see things that you wouldn't see otherwise. And I think that is the beauty of history, is you have enough context, so it's concrete enough for you to put yourself in that person's shoes or in a certain situation, but without the consequences of if it goes wrong or whatever. What do you think of that?
Yes, I mean, there's kind of this idea of, I don't know if I'll try to keep this kind of brief, but I think it's really the David Hume argument. So the philosopher Hume says, I'm going to grossly oversimplify. So if you have any philosophers listening, they're going to email you like, that guy has no idea about philosophy. But like the freshman college level conversation about David Hume would be, in essence, you're watching all of these complex factors interact, and it's actually the human brain that creates causality. because you're to isolate in which things led to which things is actually human activity layered on to all of that. Now, I'm not interested in debating the philosophies of Hume, but that basic that concept that you need to be aware where the causalities are being overlaid by you, the thinker, versus what the causalities actually were in the physics of the infinite and unknowable collisions of atoms in the world or human beings acting in the trillions of other factors that are going on. And it is equally, it would be equally spurious to say that therefore we cannot know any causality really. I don't think that makes no sense. And you couldn't function in that world. Also, you just want to be wary of overfitting those causalities. And that's where I think thinking about why things didn't happen a different way is really useful. It's not so much this happened, that led to that, therefore I know what the causality is. It's this happened, and then these other things didn't happen. And that kind of gives me a lens to understand, to kind of peel apart the layers of causality in a different way.
That's what I love about your work also, is because this insight is very rare. I see a lot of people in my fraternity broadly who are obsessed with this. Oh, is this a correlation? Is it causal? And this is it correlated or is it causation? I think makes you sound super smart, and it's something that people throw around a lot. And I'm not saying don't be rigorous, right? But as you said, if you're just 100% rigorous, if you just have data, you are not like causality. I think, to simplify from Hume, is that it's like you have to show agency. It's much more about you showing agency in a situation instead of apathy. It's, can you take ownership? Can you think about the system, right? What are the boundaries? What is the constraint? What matters? If you think about all that, it has to come from you. You bring that context, you bring that setup to the data, and then in that context you can try to interpret the data, right? And then you make sure you don't overfit, etc. But building a causal model of your system, your environment, your whatever, right? If you don't do that, that's just mental laziness. And then to sit back and say, oh, is it correlation and causation? It's like, yeah, go, you can do that all life and be inert. So speaking of causal models, you built yours somewhere around 2008. Let's go back to that origin story. So tell us what phase of your life you're in and how you end up taking your first finance lessons in a church basement. That is just such an incredible story. And feel free to, during this podcast, to speak about things that are not in the book. So the idea is that this, long conversation, deep conversation is a complement to the book. So feel free to throw in everything that went through the cutting board that couldn't make it into the book, but that makes for an amazing conversation. That's my goal here.
Thank you. So I'll kind of go back in time. I'm a child of the 70s, early 80s. And, my dad, smart guy, like back to context dependent, like you drop my dad into a different economy and he ends up in a different place. Smart guy, hard worker, like all the things you'd want to be in a good dad, right? But when he came out of high school, the entire state of South Carolina, where I was raised, the entire state, not the city, the whole state, it's basically the size of Ireland. All the jobs were on one half of one page of the newspaper. That was all the jobs that were available.
Crazy.
Like they're just,
how come?
It was the 70s. It was stagflation, right? Prices are exploding. We think we have a housing crisis now, right? Home prices are going up double digits. Mortgages are 18%. You're a kid from no money, rural South Carolina. How are you supposed to like leap ahead? And got a job, very hard job. He basically crawled underneath mobile homes inspecting electrical wire. That's what he did for like $14,000 a year. And that was what he made for a long time. So what I'm trying to say is I didn't come from money, right? Hardworking people, but not money. And so because, to quote Mark Twain, because nobody, where I came from, nobody had conversations about money because nobody had any. Like, what would you talk about? And so,
but thankfully, no drugs and booze either. So no money, but no drugs and booze.
Yeah, and I think the hillbilly elegying of American culture has gone a little too far. Like we've decided that everybody was boozed up or drugged up, and no disrespect to the sitting vice president. I come from a similar type of town with similar type of economics, and yet those churches that a lot of Europeans kind of scratch their heads at, like, why do these Americans go to church so much? Like, why do they? Well, because when you're scraping by the working class of America and culture, like those are really the guardrails that keep. I say in the book, like my parents didn't dream we would get rich; they dreamed we wouldn't get in jail. Like, that was the goal, is like, keep your kid out of prison, get him out to a good job, and you did well. And so those kind of moral boundaries were there for a reason, and they serve a purpose. Okay, so I go to because I don't care about money, but I did get to go to a historical reenactment where they, like, pretend to be from the past, right? And it was the American Revolution, they had a whole battle. Like, they would, like, pretend to do the battle. It's this big event, and they let me fire a musket, and I was like, "Sold.
Wow.
I want to do history. There's muskets." And I learned that you could tell stories about the past, and I really enjoyed that. So I became a historian. And, as you're a historian, you don't get paid money, and nobody tells you about money. You get paid in prestige. You get paid by getting to go talk to people, and they have to listen to you, or you write books, and you're assigned to read them. So I have never taken a business class in my entire life, not one. And it's 2005. My wife and I are told the clear lesson of history is renting is throwing your money away, and everybody is telling you this. Smart people, everyday people, it's in the air.
That's the German dream, saving and renting money. Really, that's
Really?
like, yeah, you walk out on the street, 8 out of 10 people will tell you that's the goal of life.
Is to rent money.
Is to rent
Oh, it's to
and to
rent
save.
and to save. Yeah. Well, here it was the opposite. It was renting is throwing the money down the toilet. Like, if you,
Okay.
yeah, it was the absolute opposite. It was like, if you don't buy a house, you're never going to get ahead. And that's a very American way of thinking about things. And it's 2005, and we nodded our heads. And I thought I was pretty smart. And I signed loan documents to buy a townhouse, a tiny little townhouse. There's nothing special about it. That they let me use the borrowed student loans as my income. Like, they let me use borrowed money to borrow the money. That is, I mean, everything from the movies is kind of true. Like, I
This is
remember
the
the guy,
Big Short,
the
right?
big,
The
yeah,
Big
the
Short.
Big Short kind of stuff, right? It was. I remember the loan guy's like, "It'll be great. You're gonna make so much money on your house itself. All this is gonna pay. So it's great. Like, what you're doing is normal. Sign here." Fast forward a few years. It's
You were
2000
ninja, basically, right?
Ninja loans. Yeah, ninja loans. Yeah. And so it's 2008. A friend at our church, back to that church idea of like these moral kind of structures that exist in American culture that are pretty popular, and they have they have a real value to people's lives. And one of them is, you'll actually, in a lot of these churches, have personal finance classes. I mean, you'll have parenting classes, right? Things that they offer for the community. And so this friend at church is going to do the personal finance class. He asked us to go. I said no. And my reasoning was, my wife is getting a PhD in sociology. I'm getting a PhD in history. We're smart enough. We know how the world works. He asked me to come because he's like, what if nobody shows and I'm embarrassed? I was like, all right, fine. I'll go to support you. We sit down. They give us all these forms. We go home. We have to fill out a budget. We fill out the budget. My wife falls asleep, and I literally did not sleep the whole night. I just looked down at the papers like, who gave us a mortgage? Like, what idiot signed the mortgage? Shoot, we're the idiots that signed the mortgage. And I just became obsessed. Like, we have no business. And so we sold our house, and it sold on a Saturday. I distinctly remember it because on the Saturday, it like locked in. 7 days later, my neighbor puts her house on the market, next door neighbor, and it doesn't sell. We are the last two people off the Titanic in 2008. And I'm watching on my metaphorical, lifeboat where I survived, and I'm watching the economy implode
Collapse.
all around me. I'm watching friends lose jobs, lose their homes, like all the things. I mean, we went from a society where it was booming so fast we couldn't grow fast enough to suddenly, like, people are trying to live in their cars. And I'm like, what on earth happened? I thought I was smart. I've studied history. I'm getting a PhD in history. Didn't help at all. Didn't help me a bit. But what did help me was some common sense principles taught to me in a church. And so I started to think, like, as a historian, there's a history here. And there has to be a history of what people were told to do with their money, how it changed, did it work, why did it change? And so I naively went to to be honest with you, I just kind of like, I got interested in it. So since we're doing the long form here, I will tell you something that got cut out of the book. For the first like 8 years or so, it's just a hobby. Like, I was writing a book on radical abolitionism, which I did eventually publish with Oxford University. And, I'm riding high. Like, I'm doing the prestige game. Again, I'm making $50,000 a year, and I'm making more than anyone who had started out in my family had ever made. Like, I am like making it rain with my 50K, right? I'm a professor.
Were you tenured already then, or not yet
Not
tenured?
well. I got tenure because of my first book, and so I'm at my early university. I finished my book. I've turned in
That
my
was on
manuscript.
Calvinists. So which book was that? The one
Yeah,
on
that
the
was the
church
one
had?
on radical. It was like radical Scottish abolitionists who were like so crazy they made the other abolitionist a little nervous. Like, when you make the other abolitionists be like, well, they're a little extreme.
But
That was
what
my
made them so extreme? Like in just a few sentences, because for those
Their
who might be
idea
interested in your previous book, right?
yeah,
Because
so
I think they're a
their
great place to.
if you're familiar much with Scottish Calvinism, right? Like there's a very particular way that they see the world. And when they came to America, they transferred all of those ideas with them. This is one of the groups that didn't really change their mind about much, called the Covenanters.
Speaking
And
of copy pasting context,
yes, exactly. And it didn't work real well, right? Because it was a different context. There's a brief period in the 1600s where Scotland has a revolution. They overthrow the English government, and these radical religious leaders basically sign Scotland over to God as like basically a new Israel. And they
wow.
have a big signing ceremony. They all sign. Some people sign in blood. God doesn't show up and sign, but they assume he's good with it. And so for a few years, there's like this little like vision of Israel on the island of Britain, the Northern Ireland, British Isles. And they bring this idea over. And so their problem with the United States, even as they lived in it, was that it had two foundational sins, which is the title of my book, Founding Sins. And the founding sins were, number one, the Constitution did not acknowledge God, and number two, it had slavery in it. And their idea was you cannot have a Christian nation if you don't mention God and you do mention slavery. And so
So the
that
God part I understand, right? As a non-American, I understand the God part from the from I guess they're Catholics, right? The Scots. So I understand
no,
that.
they're Calvinists, yeah.
Okay. So that from their religious perspective, but what's the slave equation got to do with this? Like, I just.
It's great. It's a great observation. Their idea was that one of the foundational principles of the Bible was the freedom, the spiritual freedom of the individual. Because again, they're Protestants. And so you can't remove freedom from the individual. That is a tyrannical act.
Religious freedom specifically,
religious
right?
freedom, but then
In general.
they kind of amalgamated that the idea that like the individual should not have a tyrant over them. There's no king but God, kind of thing. And so I wrote that, and that history kind of gotten forgotten. And they were shockingly important in early American history. That people had kind of, in some ways, they were an inconvenient story because they didn't help the people on the left because they were too religious, and they didn't help the people on the right because they were pretty to the left on some social issues. And so it was like convenient just to like leave them out. But they got shockingly close. I mean, they met with Abraham Lincoln in the White House in the Civil War and almost convinced him to change the Constitution. So that was the story of my first book. And I've written that book. I'm riding high. I'm like, I'm gonna get tenure, and but I don't have it yet. And there's a knock on my door, and it's the honors dean. And he says, look, I've noticed you're a bright young faculty member. I want you to teach an honors class. And I said, oh, I'm very honored. That'd be, I'm honored to teach the honors. And pun aside, I said, well, I could teach an honors version of my slavery in the Atlantic class or my Revolutionary War class. He said, let's stop you there. I don't want to have the class you teach. These are the brightest kids that we have. I want you to teach something you would never otherwise teach. And he's standing in my office. I want to get tenure. I want to impress this guy. And I hear myself say, the history of financial advice in America. And he says, sounds great. And like walked out the door. And I'm like, oh, shoot. So I jot some notes down, like some ideas. It's like in the back of my head. I go to the library for, like the next week, and I start pulling books. I'm like, there isn't a book. Like there's a lot of histories of the stock market. There's a lot of histories of rich people. There's a lot of social histories of poor people, but there's no history of what Americans were told to do with their money. So after about a month, I realized that I don't have anything I can assign. This is going to be a huge headache. So I go back to him. I try to track him down because I don't want to do it by email. So I finally find him and I corner him. He's like, I'm so sorry. I've gone and I've looked. I can't find the sources that I would be able to. He's like, oh, it's too late. There's already kids enrolled.
And to continue punning, that would be dishonorable now.
Dishonorable, yes, dishonorable discharge. Yeah. And so I'm like, shoot, I have to do this now. And so I just started like really throwing myself into it. And I found the more I went, the more I was like, oh, this story needs to be told. And I was surprised that no other historian had told it. I would mention it at academic conferences and I would dismiss it. Like, that's a dumb idea. I mean, I was really told that's a dumb idea. Like, just nobody wants to read that. It's like, what? It's 300 years. No historians really do 300 years. Like, it was just like dismissed.
It's a national bestseller.
And now it's a national bestseller. So yeah, well, I think it was more like this is just it's in a prestige world. That's not a prestigious topic. Right?
They're stuck in their paradigm.
I did a system gambit, right? I traded out one, like, okay, this system has a certain set of rewards, and that's fine. But again, the working class guy in me came out, and I realized, like, I'm gonna get tenure, and all I can do now is just sit in this system. I'm gonna plug your book, right? That is just gonna reward me with a little more prestige. I'm gonna get diminishing prestige returns. There'll still be returns, but I don't need them anymore. And I've already got
compounding. It's not growing really. It's just like chicken shit on the side.
Exactly. I used to live in a mobile home with a rotted out floorboard. I've got all the prestige I'll ever need. So like, I want to do something that's useful. I want to do something that's interesting to me, and one of the things that started to evolve in my head was I wanted to research a history of everyday people and their money that everyday people today would actually want to read, and that is not most histories. Like I wanted to, I have a theme that the reader never owes you the next page, and so you have to make the reader want to turn the page and feel like there is something on the other side of that page that they will want to know. And so I started writing a very different history that none of my colleagues thought would have any reward to it, and I didn't care. I mean, I'd love to say that I used your book's ideas to like, oh, but there's this other system I can create with, no, it was just to kind of screw you guys. Y'all teach entire classes on labor history and the working class, but none of you come from the working class, which is another thing that is, here's all right. Wow, now I'm just like jazz riffing. I'm probably going to get myself in some trouble, but I have a habit when I'm at academic conferences, especially around professors who lean very much to the left and like do like working class history. And I'll always ask them, where did you go to high school? Because they're not ready for the question. If I say, where did you go to undergrad? They're ready. Oh, well, I was at Cornell and, okay. And where did you do your PhD? Oh, I was at Harvard, or I was at, I went to Ann Arbor. You're like, okay, great. You're from prestigious stuff, right? I got you. Where did you go to high school? They're not ready for it. And almost inevitably, I will go look it up, and the answer is some like the best public high school in California or some private thing in like they were at the best of the best of the best school you could drive to. And now they're writing histories of the working class. And for my idea was like, I'm actually from these people. Like I know these cultures, or at least I know what they are today. And I want to write a history about them, but that makes sense of them, but also would make sense of them to them. Like I want people to read it now. And so I was told that was a terrible idea. It's like,
What a
why?
home run you hit, right? I mean, you've just hit such a home run with this book.
Well, thank
And
you.
yeah, and I think I'm so glad you did it because as you say, right, it's if it's lived, right, if the experience it lived, it just comes across to the reader. I think that's also probably why Hillbilly Elegy was so successful, I guess,
Right.
because right, it has a lot more emotions and a lot more drama in it. But I think it's that you need that connect because it's just authentic. And that just stands out. And on the other podcast I had Musa Al Garbi, super interesting guy. He's got an very interesting origin story, but he's also from the Midwest military family for multiple generations, and he was selling shoes as a side hustle while going to community. He always thought, oh, it's these, we need these guys from the left. They care about everyone, etc. And then he ends up in Colombia and he sees the kind of exploitation he's never seen. He's like, in my small town in I think it was Arizona or whatever. He said everyone was relatively equal. Some people had more money, some had less, whatever. But like we didn't have, I didn't Uber my burrito because I wouldn't be bothered to walk 300 meters or whatever, right? He says that kind of exploitation. It's just completely absurd and stupid. And then he realizes that actually a lot of this, wokeism and problem is just, it's just people on the left just trying to flex their muscles. It's these high school guys who've super privileged who are essentially, trying to go more and more extreme to prove to the other colleagues why they're good people.
This is the Rob Henderson argument, right? This is kind of this performative, what's his phrase? I can't believe it's escaping me, but basically this idea that luxury beliefs, right? That there's these luxury beliefs that you can have when you're the upper middle class culturally, even if you're not rich, right? And that these ideas are like horrifically bad when implemented for actual people in the working class, but it makes you feel good to be supporting them. And yeah, no, I think there's a lot of that. Obviously I don't want to delve too into politics because it's, we live in such a divisive era. And one of the things I really wanted to do, and it's something I knew instinctively. Like, if you're actually from working class cultures, a lot of times, like, those cultures are not as antagonistic as you think they are.
Mhm.
Because they're all rubbing shoulders side by side. They're living life together, and there's far more camaraderie amongst almost like mutual respect. Like, hey, that's not how we do it, but like that's how your culture does it. I mean, they're on the ground. There's a lot of times a lot less antagonism than you think, and I've
Definitely.
seen that in the real world, especially building a business, like building a real estate business. I guarantee I was the only guy on the job site with a PhD, right? Like, and we'd have people from different races, right, different ethnicities, different native languages. But they all worked but there was a certain like they all liked the same kind of guy. And they all disliked the same kind of guy, right? Like on a job site, you're a certain kind of guy. Like you're competent and you do the job, or you're lazy, or you think you know what you don't know. And like that's the divide on a job site. Anyway, I know we're rambling into all kinds of things, so I'll
Yeah.
probably bring it back. But yeah.
No, But I think you spoke about real estate, right? So I mean, having worked in the real estate sector, I think I'll be hated for this, but like they're not. Let's just say very politely, they're not always the smartest people, but they're very successful at what they do. Those two sentences go together. Speaking of real estate, right? So there's this kind of obsession with many people about my age, especially also people younger, with passive income. Or, I
Mhm.
get a couple of properties, I rent them out. It's all passive. It's so nice. I don't have to work anymore. You dabbled in real estate with a PhD as a 10-year professor with a PhD in history. Like, tell us in the stories war, sort of in the trenches war
Mhm.
stories that are not in the book, and what you learned from that. Like, is there really something like passive income? Can it ever be passive? And is real estate really as simple rich dad poor dad that it's made out to be?
It is not.
And
My
tell us a bit about your portfolio, if you're okay with
Yeah, no,
sharing, like
yeah,
how big it
absolutely.
is and what you've achieved, just so people know, you're not talking out of your hat, right? Like, I think the nice thing, I think what we established is that you're extremely authentic and it's lived experience. And so, like, if you can get into the nitty gritty and the details, I think that would be super inspiring and useful for anyone listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So the passive income piece, which I'll try to bookend with beginning and ending on that. And the argument I make in the book is that passive income used to be a real thing, and back to our idea of historical context dependent, it was murdered. And this is the John Maynard Keynes argument, right? The euthanasia of the rentier, right? The idea that there used to be a thing called passive income. It was like you had a bond or a stock, it issued a dividend, or a rental property, it issued payments, and you just lived on that. Like grandma could sit by the fire in peace for her elderly years because there was passive income. But that all was born in a world with no inflation. And so I will get into the real estate thing, I promise. But just to understand my argument about passive, in 1912, in the United States, a gallon of milk costs 24 cents a gallon. Go back 100 years to Napoleon rules France in 1812, and a gallon of milk is 24 cents a gallon.
So why is there no inflation in that world? That's something that just kept like spinning in my head. Why is there no inflation during that period, and why does inflation like start dominating the economy after that?
Yeah,
And it
so
still does, right?
Right. Yeah, we live in a world in which inflation is normal, and they lived in a world in which inflation was not normal. In fact, it was unknown. There were actually deflationary periods, and then it would reinflate back to the old prices, but there was no real inflation. There was a
Was it
hyper
because there were no stable currencies, or like what's leading to like why
It's
is this the
actually
case?
not. So it's actually so there is something like a quasi gold standard that like if you layer through the self-issued currencies, what are called shin plasters, the bank notes, at the very end of the system, the best money is something you can trade for land or gold. And
It's
because they're
underwritten. It's underwritten by land and gold.
at some point in the system,
Hmm.
and that kind of tethers the value of things. And that's why I remember being a young history student, and we're having to read these chapters of American history in the late 1800s. It's all about the silver versus the gold standard versus the silver advocates. And I'm like, what is this? Because again, I never had a business class. And I remember we were all bored in those sections because it didn't make sense to us, right? That's what they're arguing about. You have people who like want inflation, but
Hmm.
can't get the government to do it. And so you have this non-inflationary world, and in that world, passive income is very simple to understand. You get a 5% return, you live on the 5%, and you don't have to draw down your principal. And then in 1912, everything changes. You asked what changes. Three things. It's World War I, the Federal Reserve, and the income tax all arrive in the same basic bucket of years. Now that's, we can get all the causality of it. And I'm sure somebody who's listening to this podcast is going to be a super nerd on finance. And they're like, well, actually the order went this way. And we can have all this. I'm just saying simplistically, those are the three things that the paradigm shifted.
Correct. Well, so can you just explain what those three things are? Because I would think there was some kind of income tax all the time. Like, I mean, the sense that, your lord on a horse would ride over, your feudal lord would take some of your harvest. Like
Right. So
what do you mean by these three
In
things?
the United States, there was no income tax. There was no federal income tax. The tax was all handled via tariff. Now,
Hmm.
there had been a brief, somebody's going to call this technicality out. It's going to be in the comments. There was one in the Civil War. Yes, there was a brief income tax in the North to fund the Civil War, but that was brief, right? And so,
Just for the war, just to finance the war.
right, and then it goes away. And so, but the really most important of those three, though, is the moving into kind of the Federal Reserve System and World War One, and needing to fund World War One. And so in 1912, or needing to fund the kind of economic background of World War One, in 1912, there's 0% inflation. And then it goes 0 to 8%. The next year it's 18%. The next year it's 17%, then 15, 15. In 5 years, prices doubled. And there was not a mother, a grandmother, or a great grandmother who had ever seen that happen in America. I'm using the American context. And so every piece of financial advice about passive income was destroyed because it didn't work. People who bought the Liberty bonds to fund the war at 4% returns were like destroyed. Like your first ever paper investment as an average American was a huge loser. Meanwhile, the stock market exploded. And real estate, I'm going to try to bring this back to real estate tracked inflation. And so Americans had always been big on real estate, but not because it went up. It rarely went up. It was that you could improve it and make it more valuable. And so all this to say, the income that we call passive today is either really low returns or it's speculative, right? You put all your money in stock, the stock market went up, that was a speculative play. It could have gone down, right? So in real estate, there's this illusion that it's passive returns. And what I tell people is if you want passive returns from real estate, if you want passive real estate, then you need to accept very passive returns, which is like 3 to 4% a year. And people will say, oh, that's not true. Yes, it is true because you, my friend, now own a bond that has a HVAC and a roof, all of which are deteriorating every single year, right? Every time it storms, your value of your bond with a roof gets pummeled, literally pummeled. And so if you want active returns in real estate, that is to say you want to make it more valuable, then you can get active. Then you have to put in active work. Like active returns, active work. So how to do the real estate thing. So let me explain that the book itself, I realized about halfway through that I was writing a recipe book, right? Like I was writing a recipe book of all the kind of recipes, financial recipes Americans had used. Some of them were crazy, right? Stuff you might not want to eat today. And some of them might work. And so I decided I would need to eat my own cooking. And so I would mix up the recipe in real world today and try it. It was kind of like a way to make this fun. Some of it was fun.
Just to get a feel, like how many such dishes did you cook? Like how many recipes are we talking about?
More than ended up in the book. So,
okay. But like just ballpark, like, and what percentage ended
15
up?
15 to 20 kind of different attempts at like, okay, they did this. Can I do this? And some of it was like dead on arrival. Like you really couldn't pull it off. I'll give you an example.
Did your wife approve this, right?
Well, that was the line. The line of what would we do was set by my wife saying under no circumstances. Like she was the actual arbiter of what would pass.
Nice. So spouses make great risk managers.
Yes,
I mean, my spouse is also like an incredible risk manager. I'm so grateful to have her because I would probably do a lot of stupid things otherwise.
Well, and I talk about that in the book. Like there's a whole chapter on the importance financially of marriage and why it was a long time piece of financial advice marriage was financial advice. So let me give you an example that would tie into the book here, which is that in the early days of thinking about the space race, it really in the wake of War of the Worlds and like the popularity, the idea of like, oh my gosh, like there's Zeppelins, you might be able to fly to the moon. There's all these attempts to claim ownership of lunar land. And believe it or not, some of these organizations still exist and still claim that it's theirs. And so to poke fun at this, I have a huge, like it comes with a deed. I have a deed to an acre of land on the Sea of Serenity that was advertised as having phenomenal earth views zoned for tourism. And I was like, well, that makes sense because if it was zoned for heavy industrial, it would ruin the phenomenal earth views. That would be terrible. Now, why did I actually buy that? It was because that was a financial strategy people thought was going to make them rich. It did not. But also I wanted to make the point about real estate. Okay, let's just assume legalities aside that I own an acre on the Sea of Serenity. How am I going to make it more valuable?
I'll tell you, you buy SpaceX stock at IPO and then in 20 years you go and develop the land on the moon.
Exactly. It's like I would basically need Elon to give me a ride. That's step one. I now have to oxygenate it. That's going to cost billions of dollars.
You have to first survive the ride before.
Yes. We can't do not one of the early SpaceX rockets. And once I do all that, now I can make it more valuable. In other words, I need to actively invest in my moon land to make its value go up. All right. That is actually how most early Americans understood real estate. So so here's another fun fact that people don't know. People think there's 3 myths about real estate. Number 1 is that it always goes up. Number 2, that it's passive. And number 3, that this is how the really big fortunes get made. No, it doesn't.
All 3 are wrong.
No, it isn't. No, they didn't. Like the biggest fortunes, not one of the biggest 100 fortunes were made entirely in real estate. Most of them were made in something else than put into real estate. It doesn't always go up. Homes in America, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Houston, not New York City, but the most major American cities that are not New York or San Fran. A home in 1990s America cost the same as 1890s America, adjusted for inflation. Like pause over that. Homes in most American cities in the 1990s, when Bill Clinton was president, cost the same as the 1890s, adjusted for inflation. By the way,
That's
they'd also gotten
incredible.
larger and safer, which means they actually had gone down in price. So it was for most of American history, the advice, believe it or not, was not that housing prices went up, but inflation, every time there's a spike in inflation, 19 teens, 1970s, all that goes out the window, and people start going, oh, it does track inflation. No, it goes up adjusted for inflation. In other words, it tracks inflation, right? And so the idea was here was something you could invest in an inflationary period that would not beat inflation, but would track it. Okay, so there's where Americans are obsessed with real estate, is it will track inflation. In the 1970s and 80s, when inflation was crazy, there were all these how to buy real estate with no money down, because you're broke, but if you wait another year, the price went up, right? And so there's all these guys, there's kind of a race to the bottom. And there's actually a book published, and I don't remember the exact year. I want to say it's 1980, it's early 80s. There's like this race to the bottom of like, here's how to buy a house with $5,000 down. And then like a couple of years later, the best-selling book is like, here's how to buy it with only $1,000. And by the end of this trajectory, there's a best-selling book, how to buy a house with no money. You have zero money to your name. And not only that, to kite the check at the closing table so that you would literally write a check for which you do not have the funds. They would hand you the security deposit. This is in the book. And then you would race to the bank. It was important that you get in your car and go straight to the bank and deposit the security deposit checks so the check would clear, which is, by the way, illegal. It was illegal then, it's illegal now. But this was how crazy people had gotten for real estate, because in an inflationary period, if you could just get in, the inflationary rise in value was going to make you the money. Right? Okay. Because I'm making this recipe, but because I'm trying to eat my own cooking, I'm like, well, I got to do this, right? If I'm doing all the other crazy things Americans did, I need to go buy real estate with no money down. And I'm anticipating this is like, and so I sit my wife down. I have this whole thing of like,
So what year is this, Joseph, right? Because you got off the Titanic in 2008. This is your second swing at real estate, I'm
yeah,
guessing.
it's like 2011, 12 when I first start pitching the idea to my wife. Our first real estate investment was to go and buy a house of our own that we renovated ourselves and lived in. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, but right about 2013, I'm like, I can see that these are not going to go to zero. And I want to do this experiment. And I actually think there may be some money to be made here.
That's a good time, I guess, right? In macro perspective, like probably the
You've
price is a
bottomed
little
out.
down. Nice.
And I told people, like, I've had so many people come to me afterwards, like, oh yeah, the Wall Street Journal review of my book dinged me for this. Like, okay, yeah, the guy bought real estate after the '08 recession. Right, that's what you do. I'm like, okay, you try buying houses in 2012, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, you could find, the prices were insane. They were insane. I once bought a house for like $3,000. A house. I could tell you that story later. But you could not find anyone who would lend you the money unless you were already rich and already had a ton of real estate. It's like in real estate, there's always something broken, and you have to figure out how to solve for the broken thing. And I had to solve for how I was going to get people to lend me money when I didn't have any money. I was a college professor.
So either you have a lot of money, like, so actually in real estate, right? Either you have very high prices and everyone's giving you money, or you have low prices and no one's giving you money, right? The broadly, these are the two zones you have to operate in.
Exactly. And so I go buy some real estate as an experiment for my book. I don't, it's gonna go whatever. It's gonna be, I think it'll be silly. And I went on this trip. I go meet with them. I go look at the houses. I buy a house in this area I can kind of see there's population pressure coming. And so I really did it to that extent. Like, I knew that these prices were probably bottomed. There was no way they could go to zero. And there were population pressures building. And that's how I selected where I was going. And I bought a house, and I also bought a 4-unit apartment building, like a tiny quadplex.
Like a multi-family kind of thing.
Right. And my wife was like, I said you could buy one. She's like, where are you getting the money for this? I was like, I don't have any money, but like, it's an experiment. It'll be fine. It'll make for a good story. And it did, because the very first house I bought, renovated it with borrowed money and put it on the market. And this amazing tenant reached out. First person. She was like, I couldn't believe I was like, I'm a genius. I'm a genius. That's what explains all of this. I'm a genius. She already owns a house. It's on the other side of the metropolitan area, but she got transferred for work. She wants to rent for a few years to figure it out. She's going to rent her house. She has the money. She is perfect. And we never saw her again. But what we did see was vans pulling up to that. She worked for a temp agency, which should have been my cue. We saw vans pulling up and loading 20 or 30 guys on the van and unloading 20 or 30 guys off.
What's these illegals, or what's going on?
These are illegal immigrants who had been brought in to work the lithium mines of North Carolina. These guys, bless these guys are human trafficked, right? They've been trafficked.
Poor things. Yeah.
And we're like, crap, like, this is not good. And so I didn't know what to do. I mean, I could just evict them because it's clear, but something in me was like, this isn't right. So we go to the cops, sit down, explain what's going on. They said, will you give us a week? And then a week later, I'm on the conference call with the FBI. And they're like, so here's what's going on. There's a human trafficking ring. You have basically turned them in. We've been sitting on them. And we'd like you to sit on this, to sit on it for another few, they said for a few days. It ended up being over a month. And they just tracked this. They tracked the whole thing. And they were able to break this ring up
So they
by
ran an
tracking them.
operation.
They ran an operation.
Yeah.
And they literally swarmed, like all the things you see on TV, like all the cops when they finally ended, like, you know, and there's like these guys running into the van and driving off to not get caught. And I own the rental property. And I walked in and it was destroyed. So I would go back to, I borrowed the money to buy this place. I borrowed the money to renovate it. And it is now completely uninhabitable. And I'm like, oh,
Did you have insurance on it, or like
no,
what?
the insurance wouldn't cover that because we knew what was happening and we didn't, evict all these things. And I was like, I think I just went broke. I think I just lost. I don't have much money, but I think it's all gone now. And what I should have done as an amateur real estate investor who'd never taken a business class and never been tutored. Now, I will say that my dad, again, back to my dad's training as an electrician, and I was aware growing up working class that you don't have a house. You have timbers and pipes and electrical wire hidden by drywall. And so that I did have that one advantage to your typical PhD in history is that I understood that behind that wall is a lot of stuff. And that's really what the house is.
And that's credit to your dad, because he really was grinding at this for
right. He
for
understood.
history.
My dad could build a house with his bare hands. And so all this to say, what I should have said is, well, I'm getting out of real estate. Instead, what I said was, and by the way, the other thing was that at the fourplex, somebody pulled a shotgun on me when we told them they couldn't be hoarders. They had like rats in the place. I was like, you can't do that. They pulled a shotgun. I had to like run for the car.
Crazy.
And I'm driving away. What I should have said is, this is not for me. I have a PhD in history. What am I doing here? But instead I thought, well, it can't get worse, right? Like, let's see how high this thing will go. And so I would go teach I signed up where I would teach all my classes at 8, 9, and 10. Then I would do my office hours. And by 1 o'clock, I would like do my work over lunch, grade by 1 o'clock, I would get out the door, change into work boots and hit job sites. And I just figured how to get good at real estate investing. And I learned the lesson we just talked about, this long rambling conversation which is my fault. I apologize for rambling, but like, it's active. I'm not going to just put a tenant in a rental property and get passive income. I'm going to have to make the money. And so I got good at real estate investing. I got good at finding deals. I got good at finding investors. I got good at managing tenants. And I learned that real estate is a very relational business.
You drank a lot of coffee with real estate agents, right?
I did, yeah. I would sit in cafes with real estate agents. And one time, I'm sitting in a cafe. I come in with a real estate agent. We're talking like, he doesn't really have a deal that I want to work, but we had a good relationship. And this other agent comes in and he says, hey, the agent I'm talking to says, hey, did you get anything done with that deal? He's like, nah, man, there's nobody's going to buy that crap. And I look up and was like, what crap? And there was a slumlord who had died. And
what's a slumlord?
A slumlord is basically somebody who owns cheap working class properties but doesn't keep them up. In essence, it's like
in very poor condition. Then,
yeah, it's housing for the poor that doesn't actually. And by the way, there's not a lot of money. I could just tell you throughout American history, I've studied this extensively. Most slumlords didn't mean to become slumlords. They just didn't realize that real estate is active, and so like by the time they were behind the 8 ball, they couldn't get out. And there's this famous example, not famous, actually, I wish it was more famous. In Chicago, when Saul Alinsky, the famous radical organizer for worker and tenant rights, who was famously the subject of Hillary Clinton's master's thesis or undergraduate thesis, Alinsky is doing this whole thing about the evil landlords in Chicago in the 50s and 60s. And they have this huge thing, and there's this meeting, and the slumlords come in the room. And like, that's the guys we're here to argue about. And they put the ownership documents for all the apartments, and they say, who do we make it out to? And they're like, what do you mean? Like, we'll give you the building, not sell it to you. We'll just give it to you. And the room, everybody cheers like, we won. And Alinsky's assistant said in his diary, he realized in that moment, there's something I don't know. They're not holding on to wealth. They're holding on to what he called turkeys, beating like it's dead. Like, I can't do
the
anything
liability.
with this. Yeah, he's like, we want to be done with it. We'll give it to you. What looked like a victory over the rich guy was actually the rich guy wasn't rich. He was broke trying to get out of this thing. And so a lot of slumlords are in that position, and I had learned that by this point. And so I came in with one real estate agent and left with the other. Like I had gone to a dance with a girl and left with another girl.
Very promiscuous of you.
Yes, I was a promiscuous investor. Go to this guy's office. We sit down. He goes over the deal. He's like, nobody's going to want to buy it. I was like, I'll buy it. But I bought it. I was like, this is my offer. Mind you, at this moment in time, I have like $800 in my checking account. I have no money to buy this with. But I bought half of a city street in a day. because they couldn't get rid of it to anybody else. And I was the only idiot willing to take it. And I just went and borrowed the money. Like I found people who would lend me the money. And
When you say people, you mean a bank or a loan shark?
both. I think that one was actually a loan shark, basically. Now, a loan shark's kind of harsh. There's these private lenders who exist in the kind of private credit markets, and I had some relationships there I'd built, and I went and borrowed the money from them. And
Yeah, we shouldn't call them loan shark. I think it's called private credit,
private
private
credit,
equity. Yeah,
yes,
it's like
they prefer private credit to loan shark. So, and all this to say, one thing leads to another. I get good at this, and at one point, I realized I look up and I'm like, I owed 40 something, not just 40 something properties. I own 40 like plots of land. Some of them have apartments on them, and like now I'm in way over my head. I'm leaned out over my skis. I'm in more debt than I can even imagine. And that's when I remembered the Mark Twain quote where he said in the book The Gilded Age, I wasn't worth a cent 2 years ago, and now I'm about to lose $1 million. And that's kind of where I was like, I'm not worth anything, but I'm about to lose a lot of money. But what I realized is it's a business, and I had to treat it like a business, and I built it as a business. And you started to build relationships and customers and contractors and all these things. And then you learn where the real value is, and you start to learn to sell what's a problem. And and I just built a real estate business.
and then it
And then
worked out, right? I'm guessing this.
I looked up one day from a spreadsheet after I had nearly had to declare bankruptcy because I'd made but like I started to build it and build it and build it. And like most things, it compounded very slowly. And then all of a sudden, and I looked up one day and realized I was a millionaire. And then I was a, multimillionaire, and then just kept going. And it was like, I don't actually have to be a professor anymore. And now, mind you, if you went to Manhattan, my net worth would be a rounding error for some of these guys, right? And I don't pretend to
But
have.
we don't want to go to Manhattan, do we?
Right, it's not Central Park wealth, right? But where I live in the kind of vast flyover states of America, I had more money than I'd ever dreamed of, and that was enough for me. And I think that's one of the critical things in personal finances. Do you know what your enough is? Some guys never have enough, and they'll go broke chasing enough. They had hundreds of millions of dollars, but I had enough, and I knew what enough was. And so that's how real estate was one of the past. And I did some other things too, and I've
But
invested in
just
other
a sec.
businesses since. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're saying this was enough, and I guess it was enough in the real world. But like in the world of show and glamour, you try to become a billionaire with crypto.
So yeah, I'll tell you the billionaire story. So yes,
Yeah.
I am, and I will tell you now. I haven't checked it I haven't checked it in the last few days. This may be old news by the time your audience hears it. But I'm actually now worth $10 billion.
Yeah, and
Which
honestly, I think since you have the practical version of hillbilly elegy, I think if you run for office now, there's a track like you can become a trillionaire.
Yeah, there you go. That's my path to power. No, I will never run for office. The political bug is not going to bite me. But okay. So we go back to that where we started this whole
Right.
conversation.
So,
William
but
Wells
you
Brown.
need to tell us whether you're trying to become a billionaire before you became a millionaire or after that.
I
Like
was a
crypto
millionaire by this point. Yeah, I was
You were already
actually
a millionaire. Okay.
I was actually, I'm pretty sure, a multimillionaire by this point. Now that sounds,
Okay.
by the way, can I just say I'm sorry? Like that sounds so braggadocious. I come from there are
It
cultures
is
of
what it is,
business where it'd be like almost embarrassing to admit you were only a multimillionaire and not like a decamillionaire or something, or 100 millionaire, centimillionaire. I come from the opposite culture where if you said that out loud, no one would be impressed with you and everyone would judge you negatively. Like it would have been, even if you had that kind of money, which we didn't know anybody who did, how dare you say it out loud? And so, me saying it now because of the book and trying to explain to people it's definitely something my grandmother would not be happy with. But all that to
Namo,
say,
right?
yeah,
Namo, or what do you call it?
Mama, yeah.
Mama.
Mama was not impressed. She didn't care how much anybody was worth. She cared what your character was.
And she's right, I think.
I think she is right.
She is
So all
right.
this to say, I've gone through the real estate journey. I'd actually, by this point, sold a bunch of it off. Like I'd sold off the headaches, and like I'd learned that like the real money in real estate is made higher up the food chain. So I'd moved higher up the food chain to nicer real estate. And I wanted to find a way to illustrate the idea that we've had cryptocurrency in America before. So this idea that crypto is the future. I say it's not the future, it's the past. Back to the William Wells Brown point, like we have had
It's
self-issued
the guy from Michigan at the start, right? The
exactly.
runaway slave.
Yeah.
That's crypto, for more than
Self-issued
hundreds of
currency.
years.
And people are like, oh, well, we have the blockchain. Yeah, okay, that's new. But they had a technology for verifying money too. It's a different technology, but they had ways of verification. In fact, I think it's up at my writing cabin. I own some old 19th century currency, and one of them is a legit $20 bill from something called the Canal Bank of New Orleans, and then one is a counterfeit. right? They knew how to tell the difference between the real thing and the counterfeit. All right, so yes, we have the blockchain, but I think cryptocurrency is not the future, it's the past. We have had self-issued currency in America before, and people didn't really like it. Like the idea that you could go to zero with your hard-earned cash was not a goal anyone had. And so when we got fiat currency from the government, people were actually pretty excited about it because you could pay your taxes with it, you could pay your debts with it. And by law, you can't tell me I can't use this.
That's why you need a currency for, actually, more than
Yes,
anything.
exactly. And so all this to say, I decided to issue my own cryptocurrency called Billionairely. I issued 1.1
That's a
bill.
nice name.
I was
Well
I
done on
was
the name.
yeah, I was like, how can I kind of express what I'm after here? So Billionairely, ticker's BNLY, and I issued 1.1 billion tokens, or created 1.1 billion tokens on Ethereum blockchain. And then I went and created a liquidity pool, and I traded in $100 of cash or of USDC, dollar back stablecoin, against 100 Billionairely tokens. And then I went onto the online exchanges and I hit refresh and I hit refresh and I hit refresh, and finally it popped and it said BNLY market cap 1.1 billion, and I owned all of it. And I was like, honey, we're billionaires. Now, by this point, my wife is completely over my antics. Like, she unfazed. And I remember her saying like something along the lines of, that's great, but the kids are at track practice and one of us needs to go get them. And I think it's going to be you today. Like, get out of your
Do something
awful.
useful.
Yes, exactly. Stop being a billionaire and go be useful. And now other
That's why
people.
that's why you need a spouse in your life, really, to just get
Yes.
you back to reality.
Well, then here's the thing. I forgot about it. I mean, I wrote it up in the book. I thought it was a great story, but I forgot about the liquidity pool. I just forgot. Like, it wasn't like it was this. And I saw on a whim, somebody asked me about it. I checked it, and somebody had gone in and traded against it again. And so now I'm worth 10 billion. I'm like, oh, Lord, what have I done? This was meant as like an educational experiment. And so all of this to say, I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to really explore like currency and cryptocurrency and what is it valued at, but I also wanted to explore net worth. And I have this idea that net worth is only valuable 3 times. Net worth is valuable when you die to see who's going to get what. It's valuable when you borrow to see if the bank can get paid back. And it's valuable when men want to impress each other to see whose is bigger. Other than that, net worth is the most meaningless stat in finance.
And one could argue that the third thing is anyway meaningless.
Yes. Well, I think it's completely
It's useless. It's useless. The first two are definitely useful, I guess, when you have to, when you have to split it,
Yeah.
or if you have to borrow against it. I think the third thing is pretty useless and probably even destructive.
Yes, and I don't. So it's a made up. By the way, the idea, the term net worth is barely 100 years old, and even when it came up, it was not intended for personal finance. It was intended for evaluating, can Andrew Carnegie pay the bank back with what the net worth of Carnegie Steel is.
Yeah,
And
no,
then,
fair enough. I mean, that's a useful question, right? Like,
right? Yeah,
and then we just took it and we put it on a magazine and started,
well, and so it was used
made it glamorous.
It was used in a Supreme Court case as evidence, and the Supreme Court ruled that you could use the IRS could use net worth as evidence in tax evasion. Like, if you were finding a way around the income tax by kind of hiding it somewhere in your net worth, well, then bankers kind of took it from there. Were like, we can find high net worth individuals and sell them financial products, and then advertisers was like, and we can sell them watches, and that's where it took off, the idea of net worth. But it's a very new historical, a relatively new historical phenomenon.
So it's more like customer segmenting from a marketing perspective, right?
Right.
That's
It's a
also
marketing
another
tool.
use of,
Yeah, it's a marketing tool. But it actually, in your everyday life, it has no value. It has no meaning.
100%, yeah. Where I think it's picking up some traction now in some quarters is around this idea of a wealth tax and taxing net worth. Because we brought it up, and I know it's a bit of a hot topic right now, and probably also one that kind of gets people riled up. I still think I should pick your mind on it. Like, what are your thoughts on this idea? Because given that net worth is in many ways such a pretty, like, a useless concept, and I think you describe your own personal journey of being completely broke and yet owning an entire street, right? I think that's the absurdity of net worth in many ways. What do you think about this idea? Like, does it make sense to tax net worth? Firstly, does it make any sense logically? And then secondly, is it doable?
So I have an essay I'm going to write soon. I've jotted down like the broad outlines of it, called "I Picked a Terrible Time to Become a Billionaire." Like of all the times, like, I become a billionaire, a paper billionaire, right when they're like, we could tax this stuff. Like, if you taxed my billion, I'm gone. Like, you're going to wipe out everything I've got. I don't, because it's not real, right? I'm going to plagiarize somebody, but the problem is I don't remember who I'm plagiarizing. So my apologies for whoever I'm quoting. It may be Tyler Cowen, I can't remember, who said socialism is a great way to diagnose the problem and a terrible way to find the solution.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so I think what we have here is we have people pointing to the feeling of wealth inequality, which wealth inequality is maybe this whole other conversation, but this sense that like some people are really, really wildly wealthy and it's not quote unquote fairly distributed. Well, okay, put aside whatever fairly means. It's not real. That is the current value of all the shares of a company times whatever it last sold for. So Jeff Bezos doesn't have billions of dollars. He has shares of Amazon multiplied by the last share price. Like I say in the book, like if you want to make Jeff Bezos poorer, you can do it right now. Just manage to go on the exchange and sell your stock of Amazon to the lowest bidder. And for a microsecond, it will lower the value of everyone else's Amazon stock, mostly Jeff Bezos's, and you will cost him money. Now it'll probably bounce back, but like it's not real. And I think here's the problem. It's not real, but it's useful in the sense that most Americans cannot wrap their mind, most people, it's an unnatural act. That's why I talk about net worth. Like it's only an idea we've had for maybe 100 years, really operationally, maybe 50. And so it's a hard idea to wrap your mind around. So if you hear wealth, you kind of think money, right? It's very easy for the mind to do that leap from wealth to money. They have this much wealth, therefore they have this much money. Therefore, why aren't they paying into the system, right? With that money. Well, it's not money, it's wealth. And getting the electorate, which let's be honest, like most voters are far more interested in the World Cup right now, right? Or NFL football in fall. We are our elections in November. Like NFL football is what we're paying attention to for all of September, October, and November. Right? There's an election, right? You're competing with the greatest show on earth, the NFL or World Cup soccer. Most people don't have the bandwidth to follow this kind of complex argument. And so it's a very useful political tool. By the way, that part of it, like pointing to the wealth alone as if it's all money, is right out of the socialist playbook from the 1910s and 20s. And Eugene Debs, who most people don't know, ran for president as a socialist in the United States, and actually until Ross Perot held the record for most third-party percentage of the vote. I guess other than Teddy Roosevelt with the Bull Moose Party, but there was an active attempt at this once before, and they used the same idea of wealth. Is it a good idea? It's a terrible idea. Right, back to this idea that socialism is a great way to find the problem and a terrible way to find the solution. And here's why. It would drain money out of capital markets in order to make those payments. That money that would be drained from capital markets is mostly Jeff Bezos will be fine. Elon is going to be fine. You know who's not going to be fine is the 401k balances of all the workers who also have all that stock in their portfolios. So when you draw down the value of that stock, you're drawing down the value of those 401k portfolios. That's going to be the first casualty. Not a single billionaire will be a casualty of this. 401k retirees and wannabe retirees will be the first casualty.
Also, young professionals with stock option compensation.
Yes, people. Yes, they're who's going to get hit first. The second group that will get hit first will be a very slow burn, kind of like rent control. Like rent control is absolutely great the single day that you implement it. For all the people who got it. For everyone else who wants to rent next month, next year, next 10 years, it's terrible because all it does is drive up prices. Same thing. You're going to pull money out of capital markets that could be going to an invention that will extend the life of cancer patients, or money that would have been directed at capital to create the next big idea or whatever that thing's going to be. And that capital that would have gone to make the world wealthier has been gone to make the tax payments. And once you do that, it's kind of hard to undo it. Once you start that ball rolling, you can't really unroll the ball. And my fear is that, like so much of these things that we see over and over again, the very people who say that the working class has a problem have a solution that will make the working class world worse. And I say that as somebody who comes from that world. And I'm a little worried at this point that there's more traction than I would have thought. I do know this is Tyler Cowen said, we are living in the era when all the bad political ideas showed up all at once. Like all of the bad ideas from history on the right and the left all came back at the same time. And so we're living in this whipsawed world of trying to figure out which bad idea from the past we want to try next.
And I think that's where history becomes important. I think that's where your book is so important, Joseph, because history tells you, it's not about telling you what worked or what's the right thing to do. It's about telling you all the stuff that's bullshit, right? And I think
yes,
why it's bullshit. That's because there's just a lot of stuff that just doesn't work, and I think that's why it's useful to figure that out.
So back to you brought this quote up from earlier that's in the book that the real lesson of history is learning what did not happen.
Exactly.
And we can go back and create an alternative path for American history where we embrace a lot of these socialist ideas, which felt really right at the time. You've got a lot of wealth inequality in the 19 teens and 20s. You've got, all kinds. I mean, the social fabric is fraying in the 1930s. There is a moment where it is realistic to consider that in that terrain, the valley, the water could have flowed down a different valley. And I would ask people to think through, if that happened, do we have the economic growth that we've had since then? Do we have, nuclear power? Do we have the kind of behemoth of an industrial sector that can create things at scale all across the world, cheaper and cheaper every year? It's not that it's perfect, but would we have the good? Everybody points to the downside. Would we have the upside? And I don't know that we would. I don't know. There's no way to prove it. It's all counterfactual. We could go on, right? But that idea that learning what didn't happen is really important. And I hope that when we are history, when you and I are gone, and our great great grandchildren are talking about the history of the 2020s, that they're saying the same thing. Like, they could have gone down a path that would have destroyed growth and progress, but they chose to find a way to keep things in balance and keep the innovation going. And I think a billionaire tax is a wonderful way to stop innovation, or at least slow it down. And I don't think that's in anybody's interest.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and I think one can draw parallels. I mean, with real estate, we have had rent control in Germany in some form here and there, and it's just been an unmitigated disaster for everyone. And as you said, it's the guys who locked in that initial rent when rents were still relatively low and were just about to start.
Mm-hmm.
They have got those nice deals and they're not moving out. And that's why, you've got like old grandma or grandpa living in a massive house or a huge apartment in the center of the city that a young family can't afford anymore, because they would have to pay double the rent. And the worst thing is, if they decide to downsize, the single person, like the single old person that can't even take care of the place, if they decide to downsize, they would have to pay more rent for something half the size. And I think it's these distortions in the market that are just completely absurd and
I
that don't
agree.
serve anyone, right?
Well, and
And
it doesn't
add
matter
to
which
that,
side.
that
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, add to that you're not building anything new, right? So if
That's
you
the
if
other
you now
part. Yeah.
build a lot more, that's okay. Then grandma or grandpa can live alone in the middle of the city with a 100, 200 square meter. But if you don't build shit, right, then you're stuck, and then the prices just keep going up, and then you bring in more rent control, and it gets even worse.
And that gets back to the idea that all the bad ideas came back all at once, and maybe not all at once, because it's not right or left, right? It's not, in my country, Democrats versus Republicans. There's bad ideas on both sides that have been embraced,
Yeah.
and I'll give you one example on that exact issue from the conservative side of things. Is California's prop? I can't remember which one it is, but it's the one that allows, basically, they can never raise the taxes on your house after you buy it.
Hmm.
And it's doing the same thing rent control's doing. It's basically saying you have an incumbency bias
Correct.
to the people who live here. And the other thing they've done is say you can't, those voters who are the homeowners say you can't build anything new.
Correct.
And so what you do is then you skew the price. Somebody has to pay that. And so it goes to the person behind you in line. So anytime we try to skew the market in favor of one group basically being insulated from change and competition, all we do is put the pressure of that change and competition on somebody else. And that pressure is going to build and build till it creates something else. So I'm in favor, whether it's from the right or from the left. They both have managed to be, in some ways, co-opted by people who want to shift the balance of competition and risk onto somebody else. And we would all actually have more affordable housing if we would get rid of all of those incumbency biases, especially the ones where you can't build enough properties for all those people. And I like Kevin Erdman's stuff. He's not very well known. He's kind of on the fringe of the housing YIMBY commentary, but I think he's kind of probably diagnosed the post-2008 crisis as somebody who owns. Like, I wrote an essay on my Substack called "I Wish I Were Poor," and I really meant it. Like, everything I just said would actually make me poorer, not richer. And if you hold all those things in place, I get richer. But I would much rather own a smaller slice of a larger pie where young people can have access to housing and affordable housing, and that the market can meet that demand, even though that's going to reduce my wealth. That's a healthier economy for everybody.
And I think
And
that's the point. A lot of multimillionaires, it's not like, oh, we're against. It's like, I think everyone is aligned on this. It's like, I think, like you said, you're a multimillionaire, you would want that. And I think a lot of people are okay. Like, as you said, I'd rather have a small piece of not just a larger pie, but a happier, divided, more inspired pie.
yeah,
The problem is you've got such a toxic environment now that, what's the point of money in such a toxic environment, right?
yeah. And we've got to find. I don't know that we're going to find it anytime soon. I think the politics of it. I talk about it in that piece. The politics of it are kind of hard, and so we're gonna now. Here's the other thing that history can do, and I talk about this a lot in the book. Is like history can remind you that this is not a new problem necessarily. We have a housing crisis in my country. I know you have one in yours. We have them. Canada has a terrible one. New Zealand, there's a
Almost
lot of
everyone seems to have one.
yes, and so the reality is, in the United States context, this is neither the first housing shortage, nor is it even the worst. Statistically, the worst was 1948, when a young man returns from World War II and he runs for Congress. And he runs for Congress and says, my number one platform issue, the reason I am running as a World War II veteran in the 1940s, is housing affordability. And his name is John F. Kennedy, right? Before he's who we think of, he's a young man running for Congress on housing affordability. In the 1870s and 90s, there were terrible housing shortages, especially in New York City and Boston. So we've had all these before, and there are strategies that people adopted because at the end of the day, vote for whoever you want to vote for. I'm personally going to vote for, I'm willing to vote for the person who will make me poorer as long as they make me poorer in the way that gives everybody what they really want, which is more housing and more abundance, right? But what I would say is like, look to the past while you're waiting for the politicians to save you, which often takes a long time and doesn't always happen. You might want to get on the right side of this shortage. Like you might want to have to make personal decisions that are tough to try to find the lessons of the past that apply today. And that is one area where we've seen what people did to manage housing shortages before. There are lessons there. You can actually adapt them. Airbnb is nothing new. Like people were renting out rooms in their house to manage,
Whatever.
yeah, it's so I'll go back. I'll close with this though. This is just one thought I had in a conversation recently. Somebody asked me like, "So you own a bunch of houses?" And I was in another conversation like, "So there was kind of this tension about like, well, I want to be in the housing market. Like you're in the housing market." I said, "I'm not in the housing market. I don't own housing. I own zoning. In fact, that's what I did. Is I got wealthier and wealthier as I traded up into the best zoned areas." Because it made the most sense. Now, I hate that, and if they would change the zoning so they could build a lot more apartments, I would actually vote in favor of it. Now, that makes me maybe a little weird, but like that, I would, because I don't care. I never wanted to be rich. Rich wasn't my goal. I want to be a writer and a historian. But I own zoning.
And you can
Zoning
still
has
put
made
food
me
on the
rich.
table, right? That's the point. You own zoning and you will still be able to put food on the table even though they build more.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. The land underneath the houses is zoned, and you can only do so much. And the land around the houses is zoned, and you can only do so much with it. And so that makes it more valuable, right? And so I think that's one of the things that is missed in this debate. People think it's a real estate debate. It's a zoning debate.
Yeah, and I think you really bring it back to first principles. There is an element, though, beyond the land, and I think that's a very interesting concept from your book, and it's something that I'm really obsessed with a bit myself, and that's this idea of time, but not time as one thing, but the two clocks. There is fast time and there is slow time. And you say history is written about fast time, right? Because that's the interesting stuff. That's the stuff that gets the eyeballs. But the fast time, slow time concept is so important when it comes to trying to get ahead. Do you want to unpack that?
Yeah, no, I'd love to.
Fast time? What is fast time? What's slow time? And how can someone get ahead? Someone listening to this, how do they leverage this lens now to get ahead?
Yeah, so I had this idea as I was researching this book. I realized that most of us don't think about financial history at all, right? Like, if they read your book and they kind of are able to think like a kind of a global history, that they might, but like very few people spend their days thinking about financial history. If you ever do, it tends to be some popular histories about what I call fast time. Fast time is when everything is changing everywhere all at once, to kind of riff off the movie, and only a handful of smart people saw it coming. And you want to be the smart people who saw it coming. You never want to be the dumb people who got wiped out. It's always 1929. It's always 2008. Why? And the answer to why is because that is not meant to teach you what to do with your money. Those books and those movies are made to entertain you. That is why they are best-selling books and top grossing movies, right? It explains, the phenomenon explains itself. And so you're not supposed to read that or watch the movie and go, oh, here's what we need to do financially. You're supposed to watch the movie and go, he's behind you. The subprime mortgage lender is behind you. It's a murder mystery. And so that's not most of financial history. One of the things I do when I'm like giving like public talks or like keynotes or something is I'll put up 2 New York Times headlines. And one of the headlines will say recession imminent. And the other one will say basically financial expansion ahead, something like that. and they're both from the New York Times, and they're 3 months apart. And I'd say, okay, this is the New York Times. These are headlines, 3 months apart. Guess the year. And people like 2007, 2000, 1928, 1929. No, 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 no. 1953. And like, other than the end of the Korean War, can you think of anything that happened interesting in finance in 1953? Probably not, right? Because it was slow time. But if I took you to 1953, everybody's telling you it's fast time on the upside or the downside. And so what I try to explain in the book is like financial time, and this is leaning on Benoit Mandelbrot's theories, if you kind of dig into the footnote side of this, is that financial time does not follow clock time. There's a lot of people who will tell you that it's going to speed up and slow down, but most of your time is pretty slow. And so another example of this that I don't have in the book, actually, I'm working on an essay on this, is if I took remember the old thing from high school or grammar school where they were trying to explain Einstein's theory of time to you? And they were like, and look, the teacher didn't really understand it either. So she like put a video on to try to explain it. And I remember the one we watched was like, there's a guy on the ground with a watch, and there's another guy on a plane with a watch, and he's flying, and they're trying to explain that basically the experiment where they were able to prove that time is actually relative and the time on the plane and the time on the watch are different. And then we put Matthew McConaughey in space, and that was how we all really learned how to explain it. Okay, financial time is actually somewhat similar. If I put a clock on your wrist, let's call it an Apple Watch just to make up something fun, and I put a clock on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and the clock on the New York Stock Exchange ticks every time a normal trade occurs for a second. Like a normal second of trading is a normal click on that one, but a normal regular time is on my watch. Most of the time it will align. They'll vaguely kind of line up. Most days, the normal volatility of stuff, it speeds up a little bit, it slows down a little bit, but it's kind of in a range. And so the watch on your wrist and the watch on the floor of the stock exchange stay roughly equivalent. And then every now and again, the clock on the stock exchange goes crazy. And suddenly it leaps ahead by several years or it crashes back several years. Your wrist still says that it's Tuesday at 7 p.m., but that clock on the stock exchange says it's last year or it's 5 years from now. And now that happens in real estate, it happens in commodities, it happens in stocks. Financial time can speed up and slow down. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. And so understanding that you're going to live most of your life in slow, laborious, boring time, but then every now and again, maybe a few times in your life, it will suddenly speed up. That sped up time rewards different things for different people, right? It doesn't reward what gets rewarded in slow time gets tested in fast time. And so there's a great Greg Larkin who does pinstripes and punks and pinstripes in New York has a great quote on this. He calls it, there's wartime finance and peacetime finance. And what works in the one doesn't work in the other. So what I tell people is like, on a personal finance level, because most Americans are not traders, right? Most Americans are getting up and going to their day jobs. You're going to live most of your life in slow time. Everybody's going to be screaming at you the whole time that it's fast. It's probably not. And in that time, you're going to have to figure out how to build things that will withstand and or get rewarded in fast time. And so fast time rewards concentration. It also punishes concentration. So can you put yourself to be insulated from the downsides of it, but also concentrated in the places that it's most likely to take off? To make this less esoteric, to try to land the plane here, is just understanding that most of the stories you are told about financial history are fast time stories. You're probably not going to live many of those histories. And so you want to figure out how to operate in slow time so that you can survive. If fast time hits, you'll be rewarded, but you want to be able to survive it. And I tell some stories about people who misunderstood what time it was in the book.
Yeah, and I think it's in everyone's lives. I think that's how they should think about it. And fast time happens rarely, but it's when very often the payoff comes. And that's what makes it also fast, or where you can plant a seed for the next moment in fast time. And you have a framework that really, I think, helps people think this through. It's three things. It's limitation, concentration, diversification. You already spoke about how concentration gets rewarded in fast time. Do you want to build that in? So now that we have slow time and fast time.
I do. But before I do that, I'm going to flip the script. All right. So I'm going to turn the interview on you. Because because one of the things that I get a lot is, so we're living in fast time right now because of AI, right? And I go, no. And it's always this disappointing answer in the conversation or the interview. And they're like, but I thought this was fast time.
We're completely aligned on this.
Yes,
We're not.
You talk about this in the System Gambit, right? In that we think that a technological revolution, when it occurs, it must occur in fast time. And what I try to explain to people, and what you do a good job explaining, how these paradigms have to shift. You can't just take the technology and plug and play into the old system. It only is revolutionary when it creates its own brand new system. Which I'm not using your phrase. You will say it better than I will. So I was going to ask you. So do you think it's fast time right now with AI? I personally, I'll put my cards on the table. Historically, most of the real money in a technological revolution was made working in it, not investing in it. Like most of the people who figured out how to master the jobs of the new technology make most of the income gains. There are a few investors who get the upside, but a lot of investors lose out. I tell story after story in the book of like, here's people who bet on fast time, and fast time showed up 50 years later and they had lost all their money by then. So the future takes its time to get here. And some people think it shows up tomorrow. It doesn't never show up. So I want to hear your thoughts on like AI. Have we reached a new system, or have people yet to build that system? And so we're really still in slow time. We have so many choke points for AI that we're still in slow time. That's my opinion. Now, feel free to tear me apart.
Yeah, thanks for flipping. I mean, it's rude if on my own pod I have you as guest and then I do the talking. But like now that you've flipped it, I think you've given me the microphone. So yeah, I think what happens is, and I'll share personally also, like I think my perspective and my lived experience. So I start specializing in math and machine learning and what's called like let's say the parents of what are the currently most exciting AI models, and this is like in the mid 2010s, and at that point you have one breakthrough after another. So around 2014, then you have one in 2016, and it did make the news, like, but in our community, in among the math nerds, we'd get mad excited about stuff, etc. And these were real breakthroughs. They were cool, but most of the world didn't care. And I think what happened with ChatGPT was now not just within our community, but anyone in the world could chat. And a chat interface is like the most intuitive thing that any human being can have. And so then I think that's when the slow time in my fraternity became fast time for everyone.
Mm.
And so for me, like seeing that just from my last 10 years in my field, right, since grad school, I think it always felt fast.
Right.
But it was fast for us, and everyone else was like, yeah, okay, do your thing. How do I give a shit, right? Now everyone else seems to be more excited because they suddenly feel, they're in this race car. So that's one. I think that's one emotional fast time, slow time perspective, which is you feel it's fast now. There's a lot of people in the community who felt that thrill of speed for like a decade already. So for them, it's not as exciting as it feels for you because you just you got a seat on the race car now.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who've been racing rounds of this track for years.
I think you are 1,000% on, because I have, this is part of the essay I'm writing to expand the fast time, slow time idea is I think it could be fast time for thee, but not me. Meaning fast time is not, again, it's happening in one space, but it's not happening in all the other spaces. And so if you were in mathematics and technology, by the way, oddly enough, the first day that I think was it OpenAI did their like Hangman thing. Do you remember that? Where they did like the Hangman, like they made Hangman in real time, like just typed in the command and it made the game Hangman.
Mm-hmm.
I watched that in my faculty office, and I remember thinking two things. One, the world will never be the same. And two, it's going to take a lot longer than they think.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
And so if you were in that world, time sped up because we're going to build the future, but the future still hasn't really gotten here yet in a real way. And so for the people in that world, it sped up, but for everybody else, it just stayed the same. And that actually does kind of make sense of history. It's like it speeds up and slows down in different ways for different people.
Definitely.
So anyway, yeah, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on that, because I thought that you would have a kind of paradigmic kind of view of it, that the whole thing has to shift for everybody to enter fast time.
Correct. So I think the important thing is first to speak about who is speaking, because this question is now being asked by everyone on the street. I think it's a question that they're asking because for the first time they're feeling the wind in their face.
Mm-hmm.
I think the people building this shit have been feeling the wind in the face for a decade, right?
Yeah,
so like,
yeah.
there is a lot of thrill and a lot of excitement, but in many ways they've had it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's it feels a little faster. There's a lot because of the overall excitement also affects you, but that's one thing. The second thing is for anyone who's been trying to make this hit the ground, right? Like to take a lot of, not necessarily the latest LLM model, but like to take in general data and algorithms and algorithms that learn and models that learn from data, and trying to make it actually move the needle in the real world across a bunch of industries, across a bunch of companies of different sizes or organizations. Anyone who's tried it, who's done that, and I've done that for a decade, realizes that it's not just about the technology, it's about the system in which that technology operates. And you get that only by operating. Like there is no, I wasn't taught this in a textbook. So like in grad school, I thought if I sit down with a pen and a piece of paper like a good mathematician and I come up with the best possible model, then I will help make the world a better place. And it's, speaking of your history academia bubble, I think it's very similar kind of bubble. You get indoctrinated in, and then you step out in the real world and you realize no one gives a rat's ass what you write on paper, right? Like it's absolutely irrelevant in many ways, right? Mostly, like there are of course exceptions, but like overall it's completely irrelevant. And so when the rubber hits the road is really where value gets created. And it, I think, ties back to your framework, which is this thing about value add. There's no passive
Mhm.
thing, or there is no, I'll do it once and let it be. You have to be actively involved. So there's nothing passive about it. And you have to constantly operate in the paradigm you're in and understand and, achieve a paradigm shift. And you have to have a causal model of what's going on. If you don't do all of this, all you're going to do is take a new technology and try to plug it into whatever you're doing, and that sells. And I think that again links to what you say, is that's where the money gets made. That's where the consultants, the vendors, and
Mhm.
everyone and their mom is now making money. And to power that, you need now infrastructure, data centers. And those data centers, like the highest value add thing in that data center is the chips. And so the chip makers are having a blast, right? And I think those are the guys making money right now. The question is all that consulting and vendor busy work actually generating value? I think that's a big question. Like, there need not be, it's like all these guys in the gold rush digging around. I don't know if it was meaningful, right? Perhaps they could have done other things with their life. So you can make money with the busy work. The question is it net positive for people? I don't know. Right. And I think that's where this argument that, oh, everything will get better, we'll live in a world of abundance, we won't know what to do. I think that's a whole bunch of bullshit. And it's never, like, I think history shows that's never happened. And now comes an interesting perspective, which is, let's say it does deliver, right? Let's say it does deliver in very quickly efficiency gains of say 20%, right? Or whatever metric you can think about, or savings of 20%. The question then becomes, what do you do with that? And we're back to this story of, the fishermen kind of chilling at the beach and all of that, which is, if you have now freed up capital, resources, whatever, through either efficiency gains or savings or whatever, you have to reinvest it, and you have to reinvest it at a higher rate. Efficiency gains or savings in themselves, which is what vendors and consultants will sell every business, makes them rich, makes the consultants and vendors rich, because they're doing busy, right? They're not passive. But the question for you as a business owner, investor, or operator is, what is it in it for you? And the question of where you position yourself in the system and what structural advantage you have then becomes important, right? This idea of leverage. Because if you free up in your existing paradigm, your existing business, you free up 10%, you will have to reinvest it at a higher rate. You cannot just say, I'll do more of the same, because if everyone does more of the same, then you have more supply for approximately the same demand in any given moment, and prices drop. And that's why any gain that is not proprietary to you and that does not have some asymmetry gets competed away in a market where
Mhm.
everyone has access to the same thing. You need a credit card, and you need and you get an API key, and that's it. And
Mhm.
everyone has access to that. Where is the leverage that you have, and where is that proprietary asymmetry that you can leverage? If you don't answer these two questions, and if you don't obsess about them, all you're doing is just running with the herd towards history again and again has shown that that's not how you get rich, right? How you
Right,
create value.
exactly. So, and that comes back to the question you'd asked about concentration, limitation, concentration, and diversification. And you have all these people telling you like the way to get rich is to diversify. I'm like, no, the way to stay rich is to diversify,
Correct.
right? Like, but the way you actually
Exactly.
get ahead. And so, I think what we're talking about with AI is like you don't really know who's going to win the race to the future, but you can make a lot of money building the road there, right? Like that's where a lot of the money's going to be made for the first wave of this.
But you'll be a road builder. You won't, that.
Right.
I think that's the other thing. You're a road builder. Be very clear about that, right?
Hmm.
And I think, and be honest about it. And I think you don't pretend as if you're taking humanity into paradise. You're not. You're just building a road, and and making money, which is fine, which is totally fine, right? But that's it. Like, don't hype it up.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're about to learn just how physical the real economy is. I mean, I think about pretty much everything that AI could be applied to. And like, I can name all the people who have to move through space and physical time to get the thing into the in product. And whether it's manufacturing or, just anything, retail. I mean, just yeah, well, maybe when we get to robotics integrated with all this, sure. But like, none of us are so close to that we need to worry about fast time hitting us too hard in the face. In terms of limitation concentration, so one of the things I think throughout history, you see people who actually go from behind to ahead. Like if you actually want to do a study of the people who don't start out at the top, but make their way there or close to there. And here I'm not talking about billionaires. I'm just mean like people who end up in a place so much better than they could have ever imagined from where they started. Those people tend to limit themselves to something they are really, as opposed to getting distracted by being all the things. Like Renaissance man is great for party talk. And like, I want the Renaissance man at my party. I don't necessarily want to know how I'm going to employ them, right? Like, and so there, now that's that. Now you do want somebody who's like broadly interested. Like, I'm not saying that, but like in terms of
You have to be
making money,
curious. Yeah.
yeah, curiosity is great. But in terms of like limiting yourself to the way you're going to make money is where you have domain expertise, where you have a comparative advantage to the rest of the world. And then concentrating relentlessly on being the best at that thing that you can possibly be. That's the people who usually make the most money. They solve somebody else's problems, but they limit themselves to solving those problems and concentrate on being the best at solving them. And then once they've made their money, then they diversify. Now, you can make the argument, and I've been thinking about this more recently than after I wrote the book, that the average person who is in tech, right, and is making loads of money for the first time in their life, and they're 28 years old, and like they're slinging money around. You could make the argument that actually diversification is good for them because they're already concentrating in their career field. The money in the bank account at the end of the month is the money they made from limiting themselves and concentrating. So it's probably a good idea to start diversifying that out so it doesn't disappear. So I do think there's some value in diversifying along the way, but you want to, I've told a lot of young people, like if it's between putting $500 a month in your 401k, which is a fine idea, or building or I call it with my wife and I, an us incorporated fund, right? Like that you're going to bet on yourself with, that you might use to pay for a credential that's going to one day, maybe not next year, but one day that's the stepping stone to the next stepping stone to the next stepping stone that allows you to double or triple your income. That's a better investment. The 401k is not going to triple your income. Right? Like it's going to help. It's going to put things away. That's great. And so I hope people will start to think through this problem that we've created for ourselves. We have collapsed retirement savings and wealth building into one thing and said they're the same activity. Historically, retirement, which by the way predates Social Security, retirement was like putting money away so that it would not be lost when you absolutely need it at the end of life. Getting ahead, you have to do actively. And with concentration. And so I hope people will not just accept at face value that the way you get rich is by steadily putting money in your 401k. You can. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying there are other investments you make in yourself, in your career or your small business or whatever you're going to start that have such exponential outsized returns that even with compound interest, you probably wouldn't have got there.
Correct. And you wouldn't have got there that fast for sure. Like, I mean, you get there when you're 70 or 80, but like, what are you going to do with that at that age anyway?
I know a guy, I try to kind of pair off. I don't want him to feel like I'm talking about him in public. But like I know so many guys. Like I kind of collapse like a composite character because I've done so many interviews with multimillionaires through the years. Like, how did you do it? And it's shockingly like they limited themselves to one thing, concentrated on doing it really, really well. Like carpet removal companies, right? Like schools. This is actually not somebody I know. This is from the Wall Street Journal, so it's safer for me, so I don't hurt a friend's feelings. But like there's this guy in the Midwest who's like figured out that when schools have to replace all their carpet, it has to happen really fast. Because you've got like the kids are coming. Break. Yeah, the summer break. And so he specializes in like, oh, there's a school that needs carpet removed. We will do it on time. We will do it with all the regulations in place. It does it over and over and over and over. It's worth over $10 million. Like, and I've just known so many people who have these stories of I found a thing that needed to be solved and I did it really, I just started doing it really well. And if you can do that and then you diversify out, like I guarantee you that guy could not have just worked at a carpet company and put $200 a month away in his 401k and been worth $10 million. He could have been worth one or two, but you exponentially grow with the limitation concentration. Then you diversify at the end.
Yeah, and then I think he's identified something outside of I'm an employee at a carpet cleaning company trying to save. I think that's why I call the system anti-Gambit. Like you just optimize within the system, the paradigm you're in. And I think the real leverage comes from changing paradigms
Mhm.
and ideally using some proprietary asymmetry. And so this guy identifies this cool niche as something that is high value and that is worth niching down into, right? Concentrating in, and doubles down on that and ends up compounding way faster. And I mean, not compounding his 401k, but compounding
Right.
his life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think very often, I mean, so much of life is paradigm changes. And I think for people who think this is fast time, I think the real value lies in being able to execute these paradigm changes, right? And they're extremely uncomfortable. And you look like an idiot, you look like a loser in the paradigm you're in. And I think that is something I personally tried to do in my own life, like kind of reinvent myself, but of course with a thesis, right? I'm not saying go and like, say I'll become an artist tomorrow or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. It's like you have to be very practical about these things and you have to think them through. But like, to go from a, I don't know, liberal arts college background to niche down into math and machine learning is like a crazy, because you look like, what is this guy doing? He's going down a rabbit hole, etc. But then, there's a thesis behind that. It so happens that a lot of the other, exciting stuff happen in parallel, and then you kind of ride that wave up. Then again, you say, okay, I don't want to just niche down in big tech. I want to see how this technology, these capabilities apply to a range of industries. And so in every industry, you kind of have to rebuild from scratch. And so overall, it looks like you're failing, or by standard metrics, or it feels like you're overstretched, or you're not extracting enough of what you could extract as compensation. But you end up building a causal model of the world that is just so much richer and more and granular that you couldn't have had you just done one thing. And so to kind of build, I think, on your point of concentration is a thesis driven concentration. It's not like just do one thing necessarily,
Right,
right?
yeah, it's not I mean, now I used to have this is an in, I'm stealing a joke, and I don't know who I'm stealing it from, okay, so I don't claim it's original, but I did hear somebody say one time, like, if you're gonna dig ditches for a living, that's fine, just be the best ditch digger in the world, and when they have to tunnel underneath the English Channel, you're the guy they'll call, right? Like, and so, yeah, like, whatever it is you're gonna do, like, become excellent at it, and look for the places the better at something you get, the more you see where the paradigm isn't optimized, right? Or
You're operating at the limits, right? You're
yes.
pushing it.
If you push yourself to the limits of it, then you see either, to your point, there's a system, I can trade this system for another one, or I can optimize within the system, both of which can make you a lot of money. And
Correct.
so it's a great part about the modern economies. There's a lot of different ways to get there, but you do have to focus your efforts in order to get, you're not going to, outside of a couple of lucky Bitcoin bros, you're not going to just buy it when it was $1 and sell it when it's
I
120,000,
don't
right?
even know if they exist now. I've never met one. I think you're the only, like I said, the only Bitcoin billionaire on the pod, but we just spoke about what that means concretely. So I think a lot of these are just scams. It's like the Nigerian prince, right? Or who was
Yeah.
actually a Spaniard. But it's the same shit. I think like falling for this is just I mean, it's just naive to think something like that happens.
I have an essay on this called Bitcoin is a Zeppelin
Yeah.
on my Substack, and I've never in my life been an internet troll. Like, I just
Really
think, it's beneath me. I'll make I just like to, like, have friends online like you that I can interact with, like new people, like, oh, cool, people with ideas, like I get to meet people. But on Bitcoin, I am a troll. Like, I will just like
nice.
plug that essay over and over. My point in that essay is cryptocurrency may well be the blockchain may well be the technology that kind of unlocks a new system for money transfer. And there's so obviously
Let
been
me push back. Let me
yeah.
troll right there, right? Because
Yeah.
this is something I keep hearing. If you just kind of go back, I went and did an extra course on cryptography with some really nice with Arvind Narayanan at Princeton University. When you go from first principles and just understand the cryptography, having studied math, it wasn't that much of a stretch. It was much more okay. I really want to understand the technology behind this. And you realize it's just a lot of redundancy and storing the same thing in a distributed way, so that you can check, and then you encrypt it, and then you can check that that time a small change is made, you check with everyone else in the network, like not everyone, but like large part of the network, that this is legit, etc. And so it's all driven with a lot of redundancy. And then you just go back and say, okay, if I have n nodes, right, if I have n people, and I have this verification protocol that's encrypted, like on the blockchain, if that number n is small, then I don't need it, right, because everyone knows everyone. And I think it was Chris Davies at was it Berkshire's at Value BRX this year or last year, the event that Guy Spear organizes, and he was saying one of the amazing things that Warren Buffett, beyond his cult, etc., manages really this trusted environment where you can come to an
Mhm.
annual shareholder meeting, shake hands, and make a deal. And he said, if we were to try to build a blockchain at that scale, the amount of energy it would consume is absurd. And I think that's the point, which is when it's a small scale, you can build that trust. You don't need technology for that. And as N gets large, the amount of energy and redundancy that's technologically in the system is just absurd. So it does not scale efficiently. It does not make any sense to build that technology. And so if trust is what you're after, you don't need a technological solution, right? I mean, as you show with all those amazing historical examples that I had no clue about, this kind of, let's underwrite something that is trusted and that people transact on, that's happened for hundreds of years in very, very diverse ways. So I don't see the point of this.
So I don't, yeah, I will defer to the technological side. What I do think it will do in the long run is ironically support the US dollar or the yen or whatever the global currency is. Because I think what's going to happen is if you're using it, your use case is probably not in the United States or Germany or Switzerland. Your use case is in Ecuador, right?
Correct.
And so what you really want is not a Bitcoin with a speculative value. What you really want is a US dollar that's
Yeah.
going to hold most of its value. Like, okay, it's going to inflate 2% or 3%. You don't care. You want to see, can I get paid in it? And can I buy food with it? Can I transact in it? And it may allow people globally to trade in the US dollar, kind of like Euro dollars do
Correct.
today.
Exactly.
And that's the Nick Carter argument, I think. But Bitcoin, I think, is going to end up being a Zeppelin. And because if I take you to the 19 teens, there's best-selling H.G. Wells, who wrote War of the Worlds. People don't know this. His follow-up book to that is called War in the Air. And it's pre-Wright brothers. So the Wright brothers haven't done the plane yet, but we already have Zeppelins that are flying people places. There's already Zeppelin airlines. And if you
Fascinating.
had said, I don't think that technology is going to be the technology of the future, people would have been like, dude, you do not understand. We are going to the moon. It's just
With the Zeppelin.
with a Zeppelin. That's intentionally a joke on the Bitcoin bros. But like that was the idea. So that it was a best-selling, that basically that the world invades America by Zeppelin. And then there was like some hand gliders from Japan. And like this is his vision of like the next world war. And so I think Bitcoin becomes the Zeppelin. It's like it was the thing that showed you could do it. It is absolutely not the technology you would ever want to do it in.
Correct.
And so I think we agree on that. Is like I just don't think this technology makes any sense to do what it says it's going to do. But anyway, so that's the one area that I will troll.
It's so enriching to speak with you because again, I didn't know this Zeppelin story, and I didn't know there was a book that promised that. That is so fascinating. I think that's where you dig up, and like you said, the point of history is you realize all the bullshit that won't work. I think that's
Yes.
why it's so useful,
Yeah.
and it allows you to run thought experiments. Go
Right.
back, and you just kind of build that muscle. I think it's a I don't see, I think taking history and even granularity or details of history to prove a certain point or make a certain argument that something will turn out a certain way, I think that's counterproductive. I think it's much more like a gym environment, like where you can do your reps. So you say, okay,
Yeah.
let's do a thought experiment. What would I do in this scenario? What would I do in the other scenario? And you have enough context to know what happens. And so it's much more a place to do these mental reps. And I think that the muscle, so it's not the mental reps themselves that matter, it's the muscle you build through those mental reps so that when you are in a real life situation, you have, you just have that muscle that helps you decide better.
That is exactly the analogy that I use about AI, is that the genius of it, not the genius, obvious the genius of it, but like for everyday people, there's going to be these bifurcated experiences. In the gym analogy, there's people who will go to the gym and lift weights, but then they will use assists to help them get through reps and stuff they would never be able to do on their own. But with that assistance, with that band or whatever it is,
Correct.
and those people are going to be ripped intellectually. Like I can use AI, not say that I am, but like people like you and me who are native to our field, mathematics, history, economics, whatever it is, and can then go to the tool and say, look, I may not have time today to read all of these reports, but can you dissect them for me and then let me ask you questions about the reports? And I'm going to come out with my already existing domain expertise so much stronger. And then there's the people who will go to AI and say, do the lifts for me. And I'm not going to lift it all. And I think increasingly we'll see the gains come from those who concentrate by using AI to get better and better and better at their thing versus those who use the AI to do the thing. And
That's
I
the
agree with the
K-shape.
reps.
I think that's the real K-shape. And
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
And also using the system gambit analogy, because that's I think also thought was, the anti-gambit, the system anti-gambit is so important, is because you're essentially saying, how can I do this faster, more efficiently, etc. And you hand it over and you say, you do it for me. But the point is not to to just limit it to what you're doing now, right? I think, and like, can you lift more? How much more can you lift? How much can you lift alone without, let's say, combining it with 10 people and stuff like that? So I think the point is not to just take what you're doing now and plug something in. That's what the vendor, that's what the consultant, that's what all these guys are going to make money from, but you won't make money as a business because doing the same thing in. So I think if you want to try to square this thing, right, if AI is so revolutionary, then it has to change the paradigm. There has never been a revolutionary technology in history that's not changed the paradigm in through which it creates value. So if it's going to change the paradigm, then stop trying to optimize that 2% in the corner of your business because it's irrelevant. It's the 401k thing, right? If everything stays the same and you do it on the side, why not, right? Or you do it defensively, but that's not how you're going to, jump into the next layer of the atmosphere, right? And I think that's the thing with AI. And now the interesting thing was, I'm so excited to be in a classroom now because I'm like 10 years into my career. I think financially wouldn't make like the best thing would be to make cash quickly would be to be in a leadership role at a technology company like I was just before. The one place with 100% AI, 100% plus AI adoption is the classroom.
Hmm.
And so I'm just so excited to be in the classroom because you are in that place where you see 100% adoption that no other industry sees. The interesting thing is you realize that if, let's say, adoption is the paradise you're trying to get to, I am already in that paradise and it doesn't look like paradise because what happens is exactly what you said, is that you have this K-shape emerging and you have students who use it to cheat, essentially, right? They essentially ask it to do the reps. And I think that's why it's fascinating to be in the trenches with them right now with this 100% AI adoption environment, because then you realize how you actually create value with it. And what I'm trying to do, as you described, is can a student lift way more weight than is humanly possible with the technology, right? Like, and also in groups, like how do you get like individual capability? How do you get to scale it in larger groups? These are all things you can only do if you are in a place that already has 100% plus adoption, and it is the classroom. There is no other place you'll get it right now. It's not fast time. It's not exciting. No one's talking about it. But I think that's the slow time that I'm currently operating in because I want to see in the trenches what it's like to create value with it in this K shape to make sure my students don't go down the cheat, let it do your work route, but they use it to rethink the paradigm. They use it to do things that were just not possible before.
I completely agree. As we
And
say,
that is exciting.
it is. As we say in the South, amen, amen, and amen.
Yeah. So I so I think we're what, like 2 hours in now. So to kind of wrap it up, I think it would be great to sort of riff and go deeper into this idea of how everyday people got ahead, right? We're not talking here of the complete destitute person lying on the street trying to get their next meal. We're not talking about some billionaire's kid, right? I think very often the fast time, the stories, eyeballs go to these two extremes. That's not that, that's the fringe, that's the rare cases. We're talking of the mass of people who's somewhere in between that spectrum. How did they get ahead? Because as you said, I think your book is so unique and so eye-opening is because it's actually focused on what most of writing should have been on, which is how did everyday people get ahead? Do you want to share some examples that didn't make it in the book, some thoughts on this, and also perhaps expand on your 7-step framework, the 7 ways that people can get ahead? So let's get super practical, let's get super tactical, super practical, and super personal about this. Someone listening, that after these 2 hours, they're saying, okay, I have all this now.
Now what?
How do I bring
Yeah.
it to life, right? How do I
Yeah.
bring it to life?
Well, thank you for, first of all, the conversation has been great. I've really enjoyed it. So, first of all, let's start with the fact that you can get ahead. I mean, you got to start there. You actually have to start believing you can. And that sounds so self-helpy and like, oh my gosh. I mean, somebody pull this guy's PhD out because it can't be authentic, right? Like, you can't say that it's all about attitude. Actually, you can. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a part of the United States government, ran some studies of personal finance, and they found that the number one predictor of what they called financial wellness, which is in essence how well you did with your money as you kind of move through your life, was a positive attitude combined with a habit of saving. Like just believing you could do it and having some basic common sense principles, like their number one predictor of being okay with your money. And then a larger study was done and reinforced. It said it was not only was that the top, but also outperformed inheritance and income. Like
Wow.
so like you could actually do better just believing you could get ahead and making some common sense cent steps forward than you could inheriting
And this
granddad's
is the
money.
consumer protection people, like the most conservative people. Like we're not talking of some guru on the internet or
Yeah,
something.
no. These are not like wildly leftist, or right leaning, get ahead gurus, or you can't ever get ahead. So I think it's like believing that you can is shockingly important. And so people say, well, oh yeah, that's great for back then, but you can't do it now. Okay, let's look at the stats. Upward mobility. So they break people into like 5 categories: bottom 20, top 20%, the different 20 percentiles. It's called the quintiles of a perfectly mobile society. People born at the bottom 20% would have an 8 in 10 chance to get out at all, to whatever the other categories are. Okay. The United States today and most of Europe is around 6 in 10. So you got a 6 in 10 chance of being born at the bottom and making it out of the bottom, 4 in 10 chance of making it to the middle class or higher, 1 in 10 chance of getting all the way to the top.
If I remember correctly, it's about 64%, right? That was the exact number I think
Something
you had for
around
the
that
US
number.
and Denmark. And it's the
Yeah.
same in the US
So
and in Denmark.
that's downward mobility. So your chances
okay,
of
that's the drop.
So
Okay.
if you're born at the top, you're the guy born at the top or the woman born at the top, you have a 6 in 60 something percent chance of falling out in your lifetime. And it doesn't matter if you're in Denmark, which is pretty socialist to the left. I mean, progressive, or the capitalist US. It's kind of the same. Now, is that perfect? No, it's not. 8 in 10 would be perfect. And then my question becomes, has anybody done that? And the answer is no. Like, there is not a society on the face of the planet in human history that has had perfect upward and downward mobility. It's never happened. So do we have perfect mobility? We do not. And we can always work at getting better. But we have a lot more than we think we do. And what are the steps that it takes to get there? All right, so just to go over them, pretty much everyone who went from behind to ahead in American history did one of, or usually a combination of 7 things. They built their own business. They took a large income in someone else's business. They combined several small incomes to create excess. So this is, I like to joke, this is an American joke. It won't make sense in Europe. But like if you go to a university with "at" in the name, so like the University of Virginia at, the University of Tennessee at, then you didn't go to the best school in your state, right? So if you went to one of these like lower tier schools, or you didn't come from money and you don't really have a transferable skill, then those people tend to combine lots of what we call side hustles. And I have a whole chapter about that in the book. They invest truly extreme portions of their income. This is the FIRE movement. These are people who will save 40, 50% of their income and invest it, and they will outrun the clock and basically retire early.
To be fair, this is what we did, my wife and I, for the first 10 years of our career. That's what allowed us to get on the property ladder in a country we were not born in.
And this is, I have a whole chapter on this, so like what I call immigrant financial strategies. I do not believe that there's really like ethnic or racial financial strategies.
It doesn't matter. Anyone moving anywhere, and can be within the same country. You move if you were to move to New York as a 20-year-old, you have no choice but to do that. There is your choice set is just that one thing you save like a beast. That's it.
Exactly. I love it. Save like a beast. It's the people who do that, and they do it no matter what their race, their ethnicity, their religion. You see it over and over in history. There are these people who will like save like a beast, and
no one sees you, like your peer group does not see the beach holidays you sacrificed.
Mm-hmm.
When you do buy an asset though, and I think this is to your point, is a lot of people who don't know you that well, haven't seen the struggle, think, look, this guy's got ahead, now we need to tax the life out of him or something.
Yes. It's somehow
there is a sacrifice. There is a deep sacrifice that's not seen.
So Dave Ramsey, one of the American financial gurus, he has a quote that I love. If you want to live like no one else, you need to live like no one else. Like, you have to make the decision to do what no one else is willing to do if you want to have the things very few people get to have. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that idea. The other things they've done is leveraged a high payout opportunity with debt or risk. This is also, now again, remember, some of these get combined. So people who saw a business strategy, Warren Buffett, who takes on about $1.70 of debt for every dollar he invests in equity. Like, it's people who said, there's an upside here that is so big that I'm going to take the asymmetrical bet. Now, don't put a mortgage on your house and buy Bitcoin. Like, let's be fair, like that's gambling. We're not talking about gambling. Invested steadily over a long period of time. This is what most people mean when they say get ahead. I go into Barnes and Noble, close your eyes, reach on the shelf and pull off a personal finance book.
That's what it'll say. 9
out of 10 chance. It's either going to be Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or it's going to say save and invest in index funds for a very long 50-year stretch and you'll be fine. And that's not wrong, but it is historically recent. And it didn't always work in history. Oh, then the last one is marry well. And by the way, marrying well survives in every era.
That's amazing. Everyone should grab Joseph's book because it has some of the most epic examples of people who married well, and I think that's not celebrated enough. I think that's really the shortcut. If you're looking for a shortcut to financial success, I think marry well is really the one and only shortcut that you can. And well can mean a lot of things, as you also argue. The real shortcut is you marry directly with someone who's a lot of money, but marry well can also mean, like in a qualitative way, marry someone who's a great person with whom you can compound together as a double income, family and couple, and who will support you to start your business and stuff like that. I guess sounds like, because you said you also did this seventh thing, so I'm guessing your wife wasn't ultra rich, but like you
No,
guys
my
grew
wife,
together.
yeah,
Yeah,
my wife had the character. So that's one of the things I talk about in the book. There's the George Washington strategy. No
correct.
one on earth would know who George Washington was if he had not married Martha Custis, who had a ton of money. And
Yeah,
so George went from like just a average guy with really good height and looks to like the one of the richest dudes in Virginia. That's why he's George Washington.
correct.
So there's that path, but there's also the path, and we see this in historical. I talk about like this was in advice manuals people would be given, like marry someone with character to build wealth, and the kind of not all that character to build wealth does not grow on trees. And so if you can find someone who knows how to take risks, mitigate risks, work hard, that's my wife all day long. And I
Mine
think,
too.
and yeah, so like we married well. You don't have to marry into money to marry well.
Correct. No, definitely. I think this was such a blast, Joseph. I think your book is just incredible. I think everyone should go and read it. I'll just quote a sentence from Joseph's book, so that if you're still, you need that extra 1% of convincing. It's just full of these incredible gold nuggets. So one of my favorite ones on real estate, for example, which is so unique. So Joseph says real estate is a put option on the dollar, a call option on housing, an income annuity, and a tax annuity all in one. I won't unpack it. Go read the book for that. Thank you so much, Joseph. This was such a blast. I think you've just done such an incredible thing, and you haven't just written a book. I think you've lived it. And yeah, I wish you so much more success with it. This is incredible.
This has been one of my favorite conversations. I'm absolutely certain it will not be our last. So thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Joseph.
See ya.